right, let's testify tonight.
Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has he done it for anyone else? I said, has he done it for anyone else? 'Cause the God that I serve, he's always at work. Has he done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing it. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
And good morning, guys. Sorry I am so late. I was tired waking up, and then this room was ice cold, and I've been trying to get it relatively comfortable, and it's tolerable at this point, but yeah. Anyway, so here we are. And so I don't know what we're going to talk about, because that's up to you guys today. I'm not going to lie, man. This has been a rough few weeks. This year has started off to a rough start for me. And I'm tired all the time, which is, I know that goes along with the MS and everything, but it's making things difficult to get anything done. Because of the snowstorm, I'm behind on the bills, so that's been frustrating. It's just been a mess. So I just want to hopefully hear something interesting from you guys that's not, hey, Mr. Bean versus, Captain America or something. So please, please, hopefully it'll be something good today. Josiah says, listen to Orthodox chanting at the same time as this music is playing. That seems like a very odd combination, but hey, whatever floats your boat. Where am I? What day is this? You are currently in front of your computer or phone, I don't know which, and today is Sunday, February 1st, 2026. Street Preacher demands a refund, I guess. Okay. Mercer says faith is but a measure of truth. After all, someone worshiping a different God, I assume that's what you mean, can have just as much faith. I'm not 100% sure which point there is, Mercer. You say faith is but a measure of truth. After all, someone worshiping a different God can have just as much faith. Well, if just hypothetically, oh, you meant not. Okay, so faith is not a measure of truth. Okay, so fine, but I don't know who you've been listening to, but I personally don't believe I've ever made the claim that faith is a measurement of truth. Faith is actually a measurement of trust. And as such, it is entirely possible to have faith in something that is untrue. You can have faith. For example, like one analogy that people commonly use when trying to describe what faith is that I have faith that the chair that I sit in is going to support me. Now, that faith can be grounded in evidence, such as the idea that I've sat in this chair 100 times before and it's always supported me in the past, or that I know the technical specs on the chair and that it's supposed to support someone of my weight. And so it doesn't, faith can be with evidence, and that's why I really get sick of people saying that faith is believing in something without evidence, because that's not what faith means at all. But blind faith is faith without evidence, but faith is generally based on some level of evidence. But you can still have faith in something that is false. I could have faith that the chair is going to support me, but the information I had about the chair was untrue, or perhaps, the chair has supported me in the past, but the chair is just getting old and I didn't realize it needed some repairs. And then I end up, pulling an LDG and falling on the floor. No, faith is not a measurement in and of itself of truth. Faith is a measurement of trust in something. Let's see. Stan says, I'm never on time and I've been losing track of days. Oh man, you and me both. Josiah says, I'm at church right now. I don't know anything theological to talk about. Well, in that case, listen to your pastor, priest, whatever you call it at your Orthodox church. Merce says, Nermal loves you. So, thank you. Creep then says, I can't believe I paid good money for this. Wait, you pay good money for this? And then, you're straightening yourself out. That says, faith is not a measurement of truth. I agree. And anybody that says otherwise doesn't understand what faith means. Faith is a measurement of trust. Sounds like Don Lemon actually got charged with involvement in that church invasion. Yeah, I saw that, and I'll be honest with you. So, as far as the protesters who stormed the church, did they, or at least the leaders of the protest, violate the so-called FACE Act? I would say yes, they clearly did. And for those of you that don't know, it is, in fact, a crime to knowingly, willingly, and intentionally disrupting a religious service. So I would say that the protesters themselves did, in fact, violate the FACE Act. Now, Don Lemon, interestingly enough, was at least claiming to be just a reporter covering the protests. And that brings up an interesting question when it comes to the media. Can you hold the media liable for whatever it is that they're covering? And I know that Don Lemon is not like a part of CBS or whatever anymore, but he's still, he's doing this as a form of news or infotainment, if you will. And I genuinely don't think that Don Lemon himself broke the law as far as that particular incident is concerned. I think that uh, the protesters did, but Don Lemon did not organize the protest, as far as I know. And when he interviewed people who were consensual to being interviewed. He didn't force anybody to interview him. And when people said they wanted to stop talking to them, he didn't force them to continue to start talking. And if you're going to accuse him of a crime in what he did, then does that mean every reporter who tries to ask a politician an uncomfortable question is guilty of a crime? Now, granted, under the current administration, the answer to that might not be as clear cut as you would think, but I tend to think that the First Amendment should stand. Well, let's see. Have you ever watched Ono Dynamite? I know you don't subscribe to OSAS. I'm not sure what OSAS is for, but although that's his primary focus, he's also very biblical in other ways. No, I've never heard of Ono Dynamite, and I don't know what OSAS is. At least, it might be something obvious, but I'm not good with acronyms. I never have been. Isn't cool details? Isn't cool details that the apostle were fishermen? Well, not all of them were. Like Peter and Andrew were, and I believe James and John were, if I remember correctly. But Matthew was a tax collector, and other apostles had were what's his name? There was the other Simon was a zealot, and zealots were actually a militant, like. Almost like what you would say, something similar to like the Proud Boys would be today. They were a militant Jewish subgroup that believed in the violent overthrow of Rome. So you would compare them to the Proud Boys or Antifa, depending on your political leanings, I suppose. But so they were all over the roadmap. But what he did not do was enlist religious scholars as his apostles. There was only one religious scholar that was an apostle of his, and that was Paul. And I do think that that's interesting, is that I think that the reason that Paul is also the only apostle that Christ recruited directly after his resurrection is because Paul didn't require any of the quote unquote religious training that any of the others would need. Paul already had all the tools he needed, but he just needed a clarification as to the nature of God. And then Creep sends an emoji. I can't tell exactly what that is, but thank you, I guess. Is faith more important than truth? Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think that it's as simple as a simple yes or no there, because you are saved by faith, and and which Christ iterates over and over and over in the New Testament, and that your faith saves you. And so, in that regard, you could say that faith is probably the most important thing there is. But that is faith that is contingent upon Yahweh being the one true God. And so, faith, assuming for a moment that Christianity is true, then faith would be the most important thing that you could possibly have. However, it is contingent upon Christianity being true. So you see the conundrum there. So I don't think that one is more important than the other, because I don't think you can't have a true faith without truth and faith. Because can't people have faith in something that there's no proof is true? Well, yeah, we kind of talked about that already. I don't know if you posted that before I went on my little diatribe about it, but yeah, you can absolutely have faith in something that is false. And if so, that faith is worthless. However, if assuming for a moment that Christianity is true, which obviously I believe, then that would mean that faith is the single most important thing you can have. One of my problems is when I'm home, I sleep a lot. I do go place. I do go places. Do. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but my problem is just that I'm tired all the time. Like even like when I go out driving, it's not uncommon that like if I pull over after I drop somebody off and I'm waiting, and then I doze off because I'm just sitting there in the car waiting, and I'm just tired, physically drained all the time, and I just, man, I wish there was some way around that. Mercer says, I heard that if you have a good reason to believe something, then faith would be unnecessary. Well, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what faith is, and that's the problem, Mercer. Is, that goes back to the incorrect idea that faith is believing in something that you don't have evidence for. Faith does not mean belief. And in fact, because it's kind of funny, I think it was James actually writes about that, in that belief is nothing, because the angels believe that God exists, and that they believe that God is the ruler of the universe, or not the angels, but the demons. He was saying the demons in hell absolutely believe that God exists, that Christ is the Christ, all that good stuff. They believe it, but they don't have faith. And so I think that we confuse faith and belief because in the modern vernacular they have become kind of synonymous. But when we apply that meaning of the word faith to the biblical concept of faith, then we are engaging in what is called presentism. That is, we are putting a modern contemporary definition or a modern contemporary understanding of things onto an ancient document inappropriately, because it is not. You can say like all day long that faith today means believing in something that you don't have proof for. And fine, if that's what you want to think faith means in a modern context, that's fine. That doesn't change what it meant as far as the word that has been translated to faith in English Bibles that was written 2,000 years ago, because that's not what that meant. Trustin in the house says, good day, how you doing? Robert says, Shalom today. Wasn't sure if you were going to stream today. Wasn't sure if you lost power. No, I didn't lose power. I've just been, well, unless you consider biological power, I've definitely been having a shortage there. And so I do apologize. Have you decided where to go after Leviticus? Yes, we are going. We're continuing our journey through the Torah, and so we will be going into Numbers. Which I'll be honest, I've never in my entire life spent a significant amount of time studying Numbers. So this should be very interesting. Can you tag along with bank robbers if you're there to document a theft? You see, that's an interesting question because if a reporter covers a crime in progress, is the reporter guilty of the crime? Is basically the question there. And I would say this: if the reporter, here's where it becomes a problem. If the reporter knowingly, and like he finds out that these people are going to rob a bank, asks if he can tag along, and then goes with them, he is not guilty of bank robbery, but he would be guilty of conspiracy because he knew about the robbery and did not inform the police. In the case of the protest, I don't know if it's clear at this point if Don A knew that their intent was to actually go into the church as opposed to protesting outside, and B if he knew, even if he did know that, if he knew that doing so was a crime. And both of those would be necessary for him to be violating the FACE Act, because because intent is a part of the FACE Act. Because you can inadvertently disrupt a church service and not violate the FACE Act. They violated because it was during service. Well, the protesters absolutely, but Don Lemon not necessarily, and that's my whole thing. I think that arresting Don Lemon was just a stunt. But arresting the protesters, which they did, by the way, arrest several of the protesters, and I have no problem with that. Gorilla says, Kaplow, I'm back from my sunny and 85 and came up to negative 10s, and I started complaining like you Southerners. Well, except that we didn't, it would be nice if it was 85 a week ago, but it wasn't. So. And he knew what they were planning to do when he agreed to accompany them. Well, that's the thing. I don't know that, I haven't seen every little detail of information that's come out, and I'm not interested in opinion pieces. If because I'm sorry, if Sean Hannity sits there and says that Don Lemon knew exactly what was going on, I unless you can show me Don Lemon saying that he knew what was going on, I'm not going to take it from Sean Hannity. Why? Because Sean Hannity has an obvious axe to grind. Just like when Donald Trump and Kristi Noem call these people getting shot by ICE terrorists, that they're not saying that because it's true. They're saying that because it's self-serving, and I find that quite frankly disgusting. Let's see. I think most people disrespect faith. I think most people disrespect faith are spoiled. I see. Meaning think that most people that disrespect faith are spoiled brats. I don't know if I would say spoiled brats. Disrespect. I mean, because the funny thing is, you say disrespect faith. Well, it's disrespectful to be sure. It's rude. It is something that I would not necessarily think is good behavior. But the motive behind it could be a thousand different things. Being a spoiled brat is only one possible root cause. Stan says, I said the protesters were at fault for something. They were disrupting a service. They were asked to leave. Yes. The protesters, 100%. I believe that the protesters were guilty of violating the FACE Act. I just don't buy that Don Lemon necessarily was. At least, and the thing is that my understanding was that originally the court refused to put out an arrest warrant for Don Lemon, and so they went another route to get a warrant anyway, which is what it is. They asked him to leave, and he didn't leave. Actually, at least in the footage that I saw, and I may not have seen all of it, but the one interview I saw of Don Lemon talking to, I think it was one of the pastors inside the church, when he asked Don Lemon to leave, he stopped. So now, if Don Lemon insisted on staying after being told to leave, then that would be a problem for sure. But I still think that Don Lemon was not the orchestrator of, or and he didn't actively participate in the protest. He was simply interviewing people on both sides of it, by the way, during the events, because he was trying, I guess, to be an impartial reporter, whether or not you buy into that. Because I mean, obviously, he has his own political ideology. He probably agrees with the protesters and all that. Because one thing that people don't talk about much is the fact that one of the pastors at this church is also an employee of ICE or Homeland Security, and one of the reasons for the protest is that they believe that this is a conflict of interest to be both a pastor and a government law enforcement official, a federal law enforcement official, as that would in and of itself be a violation of the idea of the separation clause. Which, even though there isn't a specific separation clause, I get the idea. Let's see. So Don Lemon is going with the "I just filmed the bank robbery, Your Honor" defense. I wouldn't even go there. I would say that because, again, this is not a bank robbery. This would be because here's the thing: it's not a. For example, if you're a reporter and you are covering, let's say, the winter weather, and so you're just out on the street corner recording, which you see reporters doing this kind of thing all the time. While this is happening, a bank robbery breaks out. And so the reporter, being the fearless and truth-seeking person that they are, sees this as a golden opportunity to follow the bank robbers into the bank and record the whole thing for the news. And would that be a crime? No, it would not. Okay, but that's not. There's no. The crime would be, if anything, with Don Lemon, would be conspiracy to violate the FACE Act. But in order to convict him of conspiracy, then you would need to prove that he knew that they were intending on breaking into the and prove, not suspect, prove that he knew that that they were going to go into the church with the express purpose of disrupting the service, and that he knew in doing so he would be violating federal law. And so, unless you could prove those two things, you can't really get him on conspiracy. And you certainly can't get him for, he wasn't one of the protesters, and so you can't get him for a direct violation of the FACE Act. He was simply interviewing people in the process. So, I do think that you have to be very careful about what you think is. I mean, you can argue that it was in bad taste for him to do this, but to say he broke the law, you got to be careful, because there is a thing called the First Amendment that's supposed to protect the press, unless you can prove that the press expressly broke the law. And I don't think you can prove that here. Stan says, because church is a public space, but it's private property, right? No, a church actually has its own specific and this is something I didn't know when we talked about this last week, but a church, there are certain federal laws that came about in the late 19th century as a direct result of the activities of the KKK. And it's to protect churches from intentional disruption from outsiders. And this was when the KKK was actually going around disrupting church services. So there is a actual specific law, and it's called the FACE Act, that is designed to protect churches from being disrupted like that. But to violate the FACE Act, again, people have to understand it means that you must show that there was intent to disrupt the service. And so if you go into a church service, and let's say you go into a church that is very, very conservative, like every man is wearing a suit, every woman is wearing a dress with a big old hat and all that. And you and your family go in, and you're wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and the wife's wearing, jeans and a t-shirt, and she's not wearing a hat and all that, right? And so you walk into the church just expecting to attend services, and as soon as you walk in, everybody freaks out because you're not dressed appropriately. Have you disrupted a church service? Yes. Did you violate the FACE Act? No, because your presence there was not specifically to disrupt the church service. Now, if, however, let's say that you got on YouTube because you're a snarky little jerk, and you get on YouTube and you say, okay, guys, check this out. I'm going to go to this crazy conservative church and watch it blow their minds because I have the audacity to wear jeans and a t shirt. Now you violated the FACE Act because you've shown intent to disrupt the service. So with Don Lemon, you have to show that he personally went there to disrupt the church service, as opposed to just going there to chronicle what was going on. Um, the only thing I think you could get him on would be conspiracy, and to show that you would have to show that he knew their detailed plans ahead of time, and he knew what they were doing was illegal. And so I don't think you're going to get him on that. OSAS means once saved. Oh, okay. So, no, I do not believe in once saved, always saved. However, does that mean that now let me make this clear. While I am not a once saved, always saved guy, obviously, that doesn't mean that I won't, quote unquote, break bread with another Christian who is once saved, always saved. I do not think that this is a, quote unquote, major theological issue. Even though it is about salvation, I don't think that your salvation hinges upon your correct understanding of once saved, always saved. So if you believe in once saved, always saved, and another person believes in some kind of conditional salvation, then I see both these people as potential Christians, right? So I don't see that in and of itself as a problem. I think when you get into problems is when people would deny core tenets of the New Testament, like that Christ died for your sins or something like that. And Oasis, great band. Okay, I don't remember a band named Oasis, but I'll take your word for it. Gorilla says he supported the arrest of journalists filming January 6th, so he should be held to the same rules he wanted. Personally, I don't give a crap about it. I got bigger problems. Well, I would say this. I don't know, and I'll just taking your word for it, because again, I don't follow Don Lemon. I've heard of him just because, like, what was that interview he did with, I can't even remember who it was now. Elon Musk, I think it was. I saw an interview he did with Elon Musk, but that's about all I've ever seen with him. But so I don't really give a crap about Don Lemon. I don't know what his opinion of the January 6th protesters or any journalists that were there. But let's say that he did, in fact, state that he felt like the journalist, and again, that would be kind of weird for a journalist to say this, but let's say he did say that any journalists that were covering January 6th on the scene should have been arrested along with the protesters. Okay, that could be his opinion, but that doesn't change whether or not he himself committed a crime at this incident. You got to be careful about that because someone can be a complete and total jerk. That does not change whether or not action A was a crime. As an example, the guy that was shot by ICE, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but Alex Preda, something like that. So they found a video of him from 11 days prior to that where he was involved in an ICE protest and he literally kicked the taillight off of an ICE vehicle. And so they're saying, see, look at what a jerk this guy was. He clearly got what he had coming. And here's the problem. Him kicking the taillight out of that ICE vehicle means that he committed a crime of vandalism, and you could actually call it assault on a federal officer, even because attacking someone's vehicle is assault. So you could say that that would be assault on a federal officer, and it could also be a vandalism charge. And he got off lucky in that the ICE officers, they did get out of the vehicle, they grabbed him and tackled him, but then they just left him rather than arresting him. So he got off easy in that case. Now, on the flip side, that was inappropriate behavior on the ICE officers because it's not the job of any law enforcement to rough somebody up because they committed a crime. That would be the equivalent of the officer becoming basically having the right to punish someone for committing a crime. Police don't have the right to punish you. They can only arrest you and bring you before a judge. The judge can then punish you with a sentence. So the force that a police officer uses, it needs to be whatever force is necessary to in order to implement the arrest or to maintain general safety. There was no safety issue at stake there because he was not threatening them at that point. Yes, he kicked the taillight off the vehicle, but he wasn't threatening the officers inside. And so when they tackled him, they should have arrested him. Why they didn't, I don't know. I would say that he got off lucky there. All that being said, all that shows us that the guy was a jerk 11 days prior to the incident where he was on his hands and knees, disarmed, shot in the back, and then shot 10 times by ICE officers. And that, and keep in mind, he was on his hands and knees and disarmed when the first shot was fired. So he was not fighting the officers. He was not attacking the officers. At best, you could argue that he was passively resisting and I don't think there's been any footage that really makes the audio particularly clear, but if he was not complying to instructions from the ICE officers when he was on his hands and knees, you could argue that he was passively resisting. But he was not a threat to anybody, and he was, in fact, disarmed. So what happened to him was wrong. The fact that he was a jerk 11 days earlier doesn't change the fact that what happened to him was wrong. And so I think we need to be very, very cautious about how we analyze things because what we tend to do is we let our emotions get in the way and we think, aha, well, this guy is a jerk and therefore they deserved it. And the problem is that's not what the criminal justice system is all about. The idea of the system is that the decision is to be made by a jury of 12 impartial individuals, not by the police and not by public opinion. Does a church have the right to remove people who are causing problems? They absolutely do. And most churches that are large enough, including the one that I attend, the Experience Community Church, will have security for just that. Like we actually bring in sheriff and police personnel off duty, but they are in uniform to basically maintain security at all times. And if somebody does cause a problem, they are escorted off. Now, it's generally done as quietly as possible, and it's not, so far at least, it's never been violent. But if somebody is causing a disruption, they are escorted off the property. And the thing is that yes, you can be trespassed off a church, just like you can be trespassed from a Walmart or any other privately owned public space. I try to bring my priest on here. I don't want to pick a fight with your priest. I disagree with the Orthodox Church on some things, and I don't think I'm going to convince your priest that the Orthodox Church is wrong, and I don't think he's going to convince me that I'm wrong, because these are fundamental disagreements on. It's not just interpretation of Scripture, but the priority of Scripture. And that's my biggest problem with both the Orthodox and Catholic Church, is that they believe that the church's authority supersedes the authority of Scripture itself. I don't believe that. And I'm but it's something that it wouldn't be worth fighting over, except that maybe if I'm misunderstanding what the belief is, maybe he could explain that to me. But I think we're still going to come up with a problem in that the Orthodox Church does believe that church tradition is, it's funny because don't get me wrong, they're not the only ones to do this, right? The Orthodox Church does it, the Catholic Church does it, and the Jews do it. That the difference is the Jews have been doing it longer than the Orthodox or the Catholic churches. For them, you have the Torah and the Tanakh, which is combined what we would generally call the Old Testament in from the Christian perspective. They would call it the Hebrew Bible, but the that's their holy writings, the inspired writings of God, however you want to put it. But then they have the Talmud. And the Talmud is a collection, and there's more than one Talmud, but the Talmud are collections of rabbinic writings that date back to, some of which date back to prior to the existence of Christ. And these rabbinic writings, in some cases, will directly contradict Torah, or at least modify Torah. And they'll do so in order to explain away, like, oh, why don't we have to sacrifice anymore? Right? And their arguments might be sound, they might be logical, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But the problem is that they're not scriptural. And what Scripture says, as far as, for example, the sacrificial system, is that it would be for all generations, for all time. Those are the words of God Himself speaking to Moses. And so, I guess, with as far as the Jewish Talmud, they meant, well, when God said that, He didn't really mean it. Now, the Christian explanation is that that's when Christ explained that He came to fulfill the law, it meant that the sacrificial system was no longer necessary because He was the ultimate sacrifice. But if you don't believe that Christ was the Messiah, you have a serious problem there. And so, but that's a similar issue as I have with people who will cite church fathers or church tradition not as a supplement. Like, for example, I don't have a problem with understanding church, and I know people don't like the word tradition, because, and I don't even like the word, because it really should say church history, because a lot of the old writings is how we know. For example, when people say, well, how do you actually know that, Matthew wrote Matthew and Mark wrote Mark and Luke wrote Luke, right? And a lot of that goes back to the church writings from the first and second century. We do know that those are the people that wrote those books. It was common knowledge back then, just like it's common knowledge today that J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter. So if 10,000 years from now they're debating over who wrote Harry Potter and they didn't have a copy of the book with her name on it, they could say, well, here's an article about Harry Potter that says, hey, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling, blah, 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 right? And so that's how we know that Mark wrote Mark and Luke wrote Luke. But people don't want to accept that, because it's not in the Bible itself. Well, I don't think that there's a problem there. I think that that's because that doesn't change the meaning of Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, just to know who it is that wrote them. I do think, though, that if you have doctrines and theological beliefs that come from non inspired sources, that can be problematic at best. You need to cite a source of theological truths that is a legitimate theological source, and that would mean a holy writing or natural theology. And if it's anything else, if it's just the opinions of some person, then I patently reject it. All right. Yes, they do stand. They are trespassing if they don't leave when asked to leave. Yeah, that's true of any private property. That if you are asked to leave and you refuse, that is the very definition of trespass. If he comes, talks to me today. If he comes, talks to me today. Okay. Robert says, I saw a news story just a while ago here on YouTube where in the Nashville area, many people are without power, probably will be for several more days. Yes, in fact, when I was driving yesterday, I took a person to the airport, and on the way back from the airport, there's a neighborhood right near the international airport that's without power still. Which actually kind of surprised me that someplace that's in that central location would actually be without power. But yeah, several city blocks that I drove through had no power. Creep says, "Once saved, always saved." I don't think is true. For one, God knows your heart. When you're truly saved, if God knows all, it's like saying, "When I sin, all I need to do is ask God to forgive me, and through His grace, I'm forgiven. If I want more grace, then shouldn't I sin more?" It doesn't work that way. Well, the funny thing is that's something Paul even wrote about. Is that should we not sin more that grace would abound? Is how Paul put it, and of course he responds to his own question with absolutely not. And the thing about once saved, always saved is I get that some people, like you might argue that, well, if God sees all time, past, present, and future, then God knows ultimately whether or not you are saved at the end of your life, right? God does know the answer to that. But you don't. And when I say that, I mean, I think that people who are I don't have a problem with having confidence in your salvation, but I do have a problem with having overconfidence in your salvation, because that's how you end up like the Pharisees. Is that overconfidence in your salvation? It leads to self-righteousness and arrogance. You should never believe that it is impossible for you to not be saved. Because as soon as you believe it is impossible for you to not be saved, then that means you're going to start excusing yourself of things you would not excuse others of. So, yeah, you need to be very, very cautious about that. Ms. Moneypenny says, we got a foot of snow. And I assume you're talking about the white, fluffy stuff that falls from the sky, not the other kind of snow you're so well known for. In which case, I'm jealous of you because we only got a few inches and then it got buried in ice. Let's see. The thing is, it might lead to sinfulness, but that's just how people are. Also, God doesn't have to condemn someone to hell to be scary. Justice doesn't always have to involve hell. That's an interesting point too. Like, we know that God is just, and if God is just, that means that wrongdoing will be reconciled in some way. So if you commit evil actions in your life, but you also have met the requirements of salvation, then that doesn't mean there won't be some kind of corporal punishment involved. And we don't know what that would entail ultimately, but I would dare say that it will be a just punishment. And just like, and that's one of the reasons that I tend to lean towards annihilationism as a concept, because if God is just, then he would not punish someone for all eternity for a finite crime. I would agree with atheists and other objectors to the concept of hell being an eternal torture, is that would be an inherently unjust system, and I tend to agree with that. So I think that, but I think annihilationism can be a completely just system. His, not hus. I assume that's, because his grace, yeah. I got that. In Orthodox Church, priests read from a beautiful golden Bible. Okay. I don't know if there's a significance to the Bible being golden or not, or if that happens to just be what your church Bible happens to look like. But the importance of the Bible is not the color of the cover; it is the contents of the book itself. And let's see. Church has been canceled the last 2 weeks. I'm sorry to hear that. Our church was canceled last week because of the weather, but this week we were able to attend. Street Preachers, aka Stan, says, or if the reporter is informed about the crime ahead of time but doesn't alert law enforcement and goes along for the ride. Well, that's where I'm saying if you would have to show that A, he knew the extent of what they were going to do and that it was a crime. That's how the only way you could convict Lemon would be to show that he knew that they were going to disrupt the church service and that disrupting the church service would be a crime. Then you could bust him for not reporting it. Now, if he didn't know it was a crime, you can't hold someone accountable for not reporting something that they don't know that they're supposed to report. So you can't be convicted for conspiracy if you don't know that it's a conspiracy. And you may not have to know the definition of the word conspiracy to know it's a conspiracy. To know it's a conspiracy means you know that they are going to do action X, and action X is an illegal act. If you don't know those two things, you can't be a part of the conspiracy. Sunday service at the Orthodox Church doesn't talk about politics. That's fine. Generally speaking, our pastor doesn't talk about politics much either. I disagree with that. I don't think it's a major issue, obviously, but I disagree with that as a general practice, not because I think that pastors should be more political, but because I think that there are some times when we have to look at things through a Christian lens, or to just make sure people are properly informed. Sometimes there's moral outrage about something, maybe even justly so. So, for example, if you want to say you're morally outraged at Don Lemon for having the audacity to go into this church, that can be completely legitimate. But that doesn't mean he did anything illegal. And you have to know the difference. And if you don't know the difference, but you're mouthing off about it, then you're speaking from ignorance. Stan says, crazy, I saw some video of Myrtle Beach and it was covered in snow. Yes. Florida, some parts of Florida getting the first snow they've seen in 80 years. And Street asking Gorilla if he's dried out after his trip. These so-called vacations will soon be my death. I'm so sick from the drink. I need home for a rest. Let's see. People documenting January 6th were still arrested and charged. Why would Lemon get special treatment? Again, I think that January 6th was a different type of event than Lemon, and I don't know what people documenting January 6th you're talking about specifically. Are you talking about reporters that were clearly interviewing people and conducting the business of reporting and documenting, or are you talking about members of the crowd that were just holding up a cell phone? Because I'm sorry, I do believe there's a difference. Don't get me wrong. I think that First Amendment privileges do apply to a certain extent to someone holding a cell phone. So, for example, if a police officer is conducting an arrest and you want to record it with your cell phone, that is your constitutional right to do so. And that falls under First Amendment privilege. However, if you are part of an invading force on the United States Capitol building, and you're holding out your cell phone so that you can get footage of it while it's going on, that doesn't instantly make you a reporter. And if you are a reporter of some kind, like let's say that you are working for CNN and for whatever reason you just have a cell phone on you and you're with the crowd, then guess what? As soon as if they arrested you and you went to trial and then they showed the footage on your phone of you talking to your phone and trying to interview people and stuff as you're getting swept into the building completely innocently, then you would be exonerated of any charges. Don Lemon is doing this goofy crap, hoping he gets his job back at CNN. I don't know, and like I said, the thing is that I think that what Don Lemon was doing was clearly the business of reporting. Now, the if you can show that he knew that they were planning on disrupting the church service and that he knew that doing so was a crime, you could get him on conspiracy. But I don't think that Lemon himself is guilty of breaking the FACE Act. Was it a family cruise talking back to, let's see. He admitted on camera exactly what they were going to do. Okay, when you say this, at what, and again, I haven't seen him admit anything on camera like that, but maybe you saw a piece of footage that I didn't. Did he say, okay, guys, so here's the deal. I'm going to go in with these guys as they disrupt this church service in order to stop them from conducting their rightful services. And, we all know that that's an illegal thing to do. But, and they told me about this a couple of hours ago, and I just chose not to tell the police. Because if he found out 30 seconds before they go in that that's what they're doing, I don't know what to tell you because unless you expect him to be superhumanly good with at doing this stuff, what's he supposed to do? If he knew hours ahead of time that they were going to go in and disrupt the service, that's key. Not just that they were going to go there, but that they were going to disrupt their service, and further that he knew that doing that was a crime. That's the only way you got him. Did he say those two things? Sean Hannity is a goof too. I would agree. That's the thing. I wouldn't believe Sean Hannity talking about Don Lemon, and I wouldn't believe Don Lemon talking about Sean Hannity. Don Lemon is no different than Sean Hannity, though. They're both political TV pundits, both have an axe to grind. Again, I've never seen Don Lemon outside of the Elon Musk interview, so I don't know as much about him. Sean Hannity, I used to watch when he was doing Hannity and Combs in the early days of Fox, when they were actually trying to be fair and balanced. And I liked that show, but Sean Hannity clearly showed his political bias because that was part of the show. Treston says, just finished the book of Jonah. It's interesting when there is a back and forth conversation between God and man. It tells us a lot about both God and humans. Oh, I agree. Haven't read Jonah in a long time. Sidetrack, I hope the Republicans don't cave and pass the part of this new government budget part requiring ICE agents to stop wearing masks. Why? I personally don't think ICE agents should wear masks. But let's see. Reason they wear them is because of the cartels that have put out contracts on ICE agents. Here's the thing about that. Do we have the United States military cover masks because they're hated by some people in the world? Do we have police wear masks because criminals don't like police officers? Do we let the FBI wear masks because people who commit federal crimes don't care for the FBI? Does the Secret Service wear masks because counterfeiters don't like Secret Service agents? I'm sorry to say, Robert, and it's just a fact of life that if you are going to pursue a career in law enforcement, one of the reasons that we say the brave men and women of law enforcement is because you do indeed need to be brave to do so, not hiding behind a mask. When you hide the identities of these people, and further, you have these people doing things that are clearly violations of the rights and due process of individuals, you run into a huge problem because there's zero accountability. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that the fact that people were doxing that one guy that shot Mrs. Good, I think that was wrong. But I also think that it's wrong that he was hiding his face in the first place. I don't think that law enforcement should be in the business of hiding. If they are in the business of hiding, then, unless they're working undercover, which, by the way, you know, I mean, honestly, if you close your eyes, can you picture, not counting someone who is like a high ranking government official like Kristi Noem, can you picture, say, three people that work for the Department of Homeland Security by their face? Right? Probably not. And I, you know, in fact, the only people I can actually picture from the Department of Homeland Security would be Kristi Noem, that dude that got fired, and the other dude that went into Minneapolis to kind of quell the problems. Other than that, I can't really picture anybody from the Department of Homeland Security. That being said, and people that work undercover, guess what? They're not out there in public doing stuff at all because they're working undercover. The undercover operatives, I'm sorry, contrary to what Kristi Noem says, undercover operations aren't running around in unmarked vans wearing masks and kidnapping people. That's not undercover work. Undercover work is generally infiltration work, where you try to become a part of a criminal organization in order to expose it from the inside. And driving around in a van and kidnapping people, that's not undercover work. And I get that. The funny thing is that I saw one person who was complaining that why are there no protests when Bill Clinton deported you know, 6 million people or however many, and George W. Bush deported 10 million people, and Barack Obama deported 5.2 million people, and Joe Biden deported 7 million people. Well, Trump deports 1.2 million people, and people freak out, and they're having all these protests, and the problem is that it's not the deportations that people like myself get upset about. I actually believe in enforcing the law. I believe that the Department of Homeland Security should, in fact, catch, arrest, and deport people who are in this country illegally, particularly people who commit violent crimes and are here illegally. That being said, that doesn't mean that we violate the basic premises of due process in doing so. You still need to follow the same rules as every other law enforcement agency. You have to get an actual warrant from an actual judge, not these warrant certifications that they've been giving out at ICE, but an actual warrant processed by an actual judge in order to go and arrest somebody at their home or whatever, or place of business. And you don't just kidnap them. That's not how it's done. Law enforcement needs to identify themselves, and give the person the opportunity to surrender peacefully. You don't just tackle them out of the blue unless you are trying to stop them from committing a felony. And by the way, being here illegally is not a felony, just to make that clear. What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to accomplish by targeting a church specifically? They're actually the reason that it's not just a church; it is that specific church, and that's because I don't remember if it's a senior pastor. I think it's the senior pastor of the church. Also happens to be a high-ranking person in the Department of Homeland Security, which the protest was that very fact. They think that that was an inherent conflict of interest. Creep says, I don't watch any of those channels anymore. I have enough problems. I'm not sure what channels you're talking about. I'm sure they didn't really think the pastor was an ICE agent. No, the pastor is, in fact, a part of Homeland Security. It's not they think he is. He actually is. And so they were protesting that fact. Now, if they were outside the church holding picket signs and just protesting, that's can be considered legit. And if Don Lemon believed that that's what they were doing, then that would further exonerate him. But if he knew in advance, like I said, that they were going to intentionally disrupt services, and he also knew that doing that was a crime, then you can get Don Lemon. The left-wing judge refused to issue the arrest warrant for Lemon, so they implemented a grand jury of people from the blue state of Minnesota, and they found probable cause in Lemon's actions for arrest. So, first of all, to call a judge left-wing or right-wing is simply because you're saying that the judge said something that you disagreed with. However, this is part of the core of the problem. If a judge, I don't give a crap if the judge is a Democrat or a Republican. If the judge's personal motivations about something get in the way of them being a judge, then they need to be removed from the bench, period. And that goes for right-wing judges as much as left-wing judges. But just because the judge refused the arrest warrant on Lemon does not make him left-wing. Because it means, and here's the difference, because a grand jury, just to make things clear, the reason they went around the judge for the grand jury is because, and you can ask any lawyer, they'll confirm this. The joke in the legal system is that a grand jury, you can get a grand jury to indict a banana. Getting an indictment from a grand jury, people think that that's like this big meaningful thing. It's not. And so it's extraordinarily easy to get an indictment from a grand jury. That's why most of the time, you know, grand juries are. I don't. I think what we should probably, at least on the federal level, eliminate the entire process of the grand jury because the standard is too low. For those of you that don't know, the standard for a grand jury is only to show that it's not probable cause that Don Lemon did X. That's not what the grand jury's probable cause level of what they have to show is. No, all they have to show is that there's probable cause that some kind of crime happened and that Don Lemon was there. Doesn't mean that he's guilty of anything, but he could be a material witness to something. He could be, in fact, he could be a suspect in the crime. But the grand jury only has to say, yeah, something bad happened there. Which, I'm sorry, that's true. Something bad did happen there. But that doesn't mean that Don Lemon broke the law. Now, when you go to a judge, the judge actually, when they look at probable cause, they're looking at, do you have probable cause to believe that this person committed this crime? Not just reasonable suspicion, which is basically the level that a grand jury works on. But a judge is going to say, is it more likely than not that this person actually did this? And so that's where, and that's, by the way, when you talk about police having probable cause to arrest you or whatever. Probable cause has to mean that a reasonable person would believe that it is it doesn't mean beyond a reasonable doubt. It means that you have that it is more likely than not that you did something, that you committed a crime. So the judge looked at the evidence and said, no, there's no probable cause here. And I agree with that judge. And I am no left winger. But I do agree with the judge. You do not have probable cause, at least not unless you show me a video where Don Lemon says, I, Don Lemon, know that these guys are going to go and intentionally disrupt the legitimate church services at this house of worship, and that doing so is a violation of the FACE Act, and I'm going to go with them, and I'm not going to report it to the police, right? Unless you have a video of him saying that, it's going to be very difficult to show probable cause that he did anything wrong. Because from what we have seen of it, Don Lemon is clearly being a reporter. He might not be a particularly good one, but he's being a reporter. And yes, I don't remember if it's ICE specifically or if it's just Department of Homeland Services, but yes, the pastor really does have the job that they were protesting. At least that's my understanding. I might get to meet your sister. I may be going to Alaska, and I'll be in the town she lives in. Oh, very cool. You're going to be up in Fairbanks? Well, if you see her, tell her I said hi. Sort of reminds me of the Nightcrawler movie where Jake Gyllenhaal, where he's a reporter, but he'll elaborate the crime scenes before he videos them. I have not seen Nightcrawler, so I can't, and when you say he'll elaborate the crime scene, I'm not sure what you mean. He'll move things around to make the event seem more exciting. Gotcha. Oh, well, thank you for explaining that before I needed to ask. But anyway, so if Don Lemon actually, for example, helped the protesters in saying, okay, so if you disrupt the church service from this door, then I'll be able to get a great shot of it from over here. Yeah, then you'd be talking. Now that's clearly conspiracy at that point. And I think he'll eventually just start completely fabricating events just to get a great news reel. Yeah. Judge says you are whitewashing what Lemon did. He traveled with the protesters to the scene of the crime and filmed himself saying he knew what they were he knew they were going there. He filmed his own demise. Okay, so again, without seeing the actual footage you're describing, if I take you at your word, line for line, what you just said, none of that would be probable cause. Why? Because a reporter traveling with a group of protesters is not a crime, and him saying that we're going to this church is not a crime. Okay, you have to understand what the crime actually is. As far as the FACE Act, it's extremely specific. It is going and intentionally disrupting a church service. Intentionally disrupting a church service. Not going to the church and staging a protest. That's perfectly legal. Okay, and so unless he says we are going into the church to intentionally disrupt the service, that's number one. And number two, you have to get him saying that he knows that that's illegal. If you don't get those two things, he did not commit a crime because he's not the protester. He's documenting it as a reporter. But the only crime you could get him on would be conspiracy because he knew of a crime and did not report it. Now, the only way you can show that is to show that he knew the full detail of what they were going to do, that they were going in to intentionally disrupt the church service, and that he knew that that was in fact illegal. If you can't show those two things, you don't have a crime on Lemon's part. He was not the protester. You are minimizing what Lemon did. He traveled with the protesters to the scene of the crime. He filmed himself saying that he knew it. He filmed. Okay, you just said the same thing twice. But yeah, again, that's not saying what he needs to say to have it be a crime on his part. Filming people doing something illegal is not illegal. Abetting is still a crime if they can prove and charge them with a crime. Even trespassing really isn't their crime because they were never served papers banning them. So abetting, let me. I don't know if that's a crime specifically in Minnesota, but let's look it up because I don't know what the definition of abetting is, but that's what I want to see. So aiding and abetting or accomplice liability involves knowingly assisting, encouraging, or facilitating another person in committing a crime, or acting as a lookout. So he didn't act as a lookout, clearly. So the question is, did he knowingly assist, encourage, or facilitate the protesters? I would say if from what I've seen, and again, I'm not claiming to have seen every tidbit of footage there is on all this, but from what I've seen, he interviews some of the protesters to get their perspective on things. He interviews some of the churchgoers, including the pastor, to get their perspective on things. But at no point does he assist the protesters in doing their protest. He does not encourage the protesters to do their protest, and he certainly does not facilitate. Like he doesn't provide the protesters with their transportation or logistics or anything like that. So, as far as I know, he did not actually commit the crime of aiding and abetting. That's even if it's actual crime in Minnesota, which I still haven't looked up. But now it can be a federal crime. It looks like treats aiders and abettors as principals regardless of their physical presence. Some jurisdictions maintain historical distinctions between aiding, abetting, and accessory before the fact. Yeah, so basically, yeah, you would have to have so. Okay, so here's what again, kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. You have to have, number one, intent. The participant must have the specific intent to help the principal commit the crime. So, can you show that Don Lemon had the specific intent of helping the protesters commit the crime of disrupt? Keep in mind, the crime is not the protest, the crime is the disruption of the church service. Did he have the specific intent in doing so? Number two, and this is important, simply knowing a crime is happening is not enough. There must be a voluntary action to help. But he had to know that there was a crime, and he must have voluntarily acted to assist them in this crime. I don't believe you can show that. If you can, great. But we'll see. And by the way, since he's been arrested, he'll have his day in court. We'll see what happens. The problem is that the judicial system and the Department of Justice and everything about our legal system, especially on the federal level, has become so hyper politicized lately that who knows if he's going to get a fair trial or not. Because it's so funny. The more that Trump talks about how the Democrats weaponize the DOJ, he's weaponizing the DOJ. I wish we lived in a country that wasn't falling apart. Instead, I wish we were living in a country that was healthy and able to have us living on other planets. Well, yeah, that's not happening. And you know what? The Bible doesn't predict that everything's going to be happy and joyful and we're all going to be holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and moving to Mars before the end times. So, or I should say, before the end of the end times. Oh, and it was a grand jury made up of people in Minnesota who issued the arrest warrant for Lemon. They were all against him, or did they believe the evidence showed probably cause? Again, a grand jury has a much lower level of jurisprudence. They don't have to show the same level as a judge does. And you can get a grand jury to convict a banana of being a banana. It's not that difficult, which we already talked about that. That's why you use a grand jury when you can't get a judge to sign off on an arrest warrant. Trespassing is a process. Police need to be there. If they refuse cops' order to leave, then they can be charged with well, you're confusing trespassing and what you would say being criminally trespassed. Those are two different things. If you come onto my private property, it doesn't matter if it's a place where the public is welcome or not, but if you come onto my private property and I tell you to leave and you refuse, you are at that moment trespassing. Now, if a police officer shows up, writes you a citation and everything, now it's official and there's charges involved, and and that's where you would talk about criminal trespass. And so once the police are involved, it's now a crime. But it's trespassing the moment I tell you to leave and you don't. Just like it's kidnapping if you say, I want to leave and I don't let you unless I have a reason to detain you. This is good stuff, by the way. I'm not mad at anybody, just so you guys know. I think this is an interesting conversation, and it's a good one to have, a healthy one to have. And it was a grand jury made of people in Minnesota. I don't know why everything you're posting seems to be popping up multiple times here. So, not sure why. And then, and it's a grand jury made up of the people of Minnesota who issued the arrest warrant for Lemon, not a U.S. attorney. And again, I know that. And again, you can get an indictment for just about anything on anyone if you want to. And in fact, here's the funny thing. Okay, it was a grand jury that indicted Donald Trump. So are you now going to admit that Donald Trump is a criminal? He was indicted by a grand jury and convicted on 40 odd counts of felony charges. So thank you for proving beyond a reasonable doubt here in the court of public opinion that Donald Trump is, in fact, a criminal. I never watched any of Don's videos on this. I have no idea what he did. I've seen some of the videos on this incident, and I've seen one other, the interview he did with Elon Musk. That's all I've ever seen of the guy. And I don't really care about reporters that are either liberal or conservative. I prefer reporters that try to just get at the facts. Unfortunately, nowadays, it's like everything else, getting all overly politicized. Robert says, I'm sorry I have to disagree. Don't be sorry for disagreeing. It's quite all right. There's nothing in Scripture that says one can lose their salvation. There's also, I don't think, anything in Scripture that says one cannot lose their salvation. I mean, if you want to, the once saved, always saved. That's why I say I don't consider it a major issue. I think that you can say that Scripture implies it in one area, it implies the opposite in others. So I do think that if you look at the fact that Paul writes about people who have fallen away from the faith or that need to be removed from the church in the hopes that they come back, then that would kind of imply that one can lose and, in fact, regain their salvation. All that being said, does he say it flat out? I don't believe so. I'm a once saved, always saved believer myself. That's fine. The problem is that means so, and this is where I don't like the once saved, always, because you end up with the same results either way. It's a distinction without a difference, because the once saved, always saved people, if somebody falls away from the church, right? So say they start attending church, it's so great that Joe Blow is saved, right? But then Joe Blow decides, you know what, I'm gay, I'm leaving the church, and goes off and lives with his friend Jack, and they live in an openly homosexual relationship. And you say, well, you know what, here's the thing about Joe, he was never really saved. He might have thought he was saved, and he even fooled us into thinking he was saved, but he wasn't really saved. And then Joe says, you know what? I'm wrong about this. I'm coming back to the church. And so he breaks up with Jack, and he comes back to church. He says, oh, praise God. You see, he was always saved. He just temporarily moved away from the church, but he was still saved. He just, he had to be pulled back in. And so, praise God, he's back and saved again. But then he goes again, and it's just playing games with it. To me, here's my thing. I don't worry about once saved, always saved, or whether you can lose your salvation, because I think worrying about that is like getting married, being worried about getting a divorce. I try to maintain my relationship with Christ. I'm not worried about whether or not I can lose it. I just do my best not to. And girl says Alex Preddy, because I couldn't remember the guy's name. Or thank you. That doesn't mean if one sins, doesn't mean God won't chastise you for the sin or sins. Yes, but if one, for example, like I said, so if somebody goes to church for 20 years and then they decide, you know what, I'm gay, I'm not going to church anymore, and so they give up on the church and they move in with their gay lover and renounce the church, are you saying they were never saved, or are you saying they are still saved and they're just going to be chastised by God? Because if you say they're saved and they're just going to be chastised by God, then here's the deal. All anybody has to do is, proclaim Jesus as their Savior and then live however the hell they want, and they're perfectly fine. This goes back to the whole, sinner's prayer thing. Can you say a prayer and that makes you saved, and now you're saved for life? Which some people do genuinely believe. But if you believe that, then that means salvation means nothing. Ever read any other version of the Bible? If you mean different translations, absolutely. If you mean other versions, like some of the blasphemous books that were never included in the Bible, like the Gospel of Thomas or something, then no. He's definitely a dick, but that can't be used against him. If you're talking about Lemon or Preddy, I would agree in both cases. Ever eat deer meat? Yes, it's called venison. If they had arrested him, maybe he would have still been in jail and not interfering the next week with them. Yeah, you could argue that. The agents probably had other things to do and didn't want to have to stop and go through the hassle of arresting and booking for damaging the SUV. Okay, so that's a perfectly fair point. However, that means that they should not have gotten out of the SUV and roughed him up, because that means that they are now guilty of assault on him. Because the police don't get to just rough you up a bit because you did something bad. Like, for example, if let's say that you and your neighbor are having a dispute, and your neighbor, because they're a jerk, kicks the taillight off your car, right? Now, at that point, you can absolutely sue your neighbor for you take them to a civil court, make them pay for your taillight and any other damages that they may have caused, and probably get a little bit extra thrown your way because of the assault. And so, say a few $100 in addition to the taillight plus court costs, right? That's perfectly legitimate. But let's say you jerk, and you grab them and you tackle them and you throw them on the ground, and in doing so, they break their arm, right? Well, guess what? Now they've got you over a barrel because you're guilty of aggravated assault. So, hey, congratulations, you've escalated. Now, it would be quite another thing. Like, let's say if somebody, and so you don't just rough somebody up. That's not how law enforcement works. The law enforcement is not the brute squad. And I'm sorry, but this and one of the scariest things to me, Stan, and this isn't necessarily on you, but on lots of people that feel this way, is the idea that we think it's somehow okay for the cops to just slap somebody around a little bit because they committed a minor infraction. Since when are the cops judge, jury, and executioner? No, that's not how it works. Which is kind of ironic because, a week and a half later, they literally executed the guy. So I don't think that that's okay at all. And we should never sit back and say, yeah, that's okay for the police to just rough somebody up a bit for what he did. No, what they could have done is arrested him, booked him, and let a judge sentence him for his crime of assault on federal property. But no, they didn't do that because they didn't want to be bothered with the paperwork or whatever. Well, if they don't want to be bothered with the paperwork, then they certainly shouldn't. And this is another reason, by the way, that these guys should absolutely not have face masks and no ID, and they absolutely should have body cams. The fact that we don't have body cams, that we hide their identities, all this stuff, man, and you guys seem to, again, not picking on you particularly, Sam, but anybody that's on board with this, and you're okay with this, that's scary to me. It's truly frightening to me that you could be completely okay with the idea of having literal secret police. Creep says, I agree with the idea that of the reason why ICE is out there, but it kind of seems a few of them are running around like they're Judge Dredd. Well, the problem is that from all I could see and find out, ICE agents are not given as much training as they need for what they're doing, and they certainly there seems to be very little accountability in their structure. Yeah, I was asking Josiah what other version. I was kind of wondering that myself. We'll see. I know I'm way behind, but maybe I'll get to it here in a minute. Well, the reason they started firing was that they disarmed him and his SIG P320, which has a history of misfiring, went off, and the other officers knew in 3 seconds they knew he was armed. If you could see him reaching behind him in his video, and you could hear someone saying gun, which might have been the person who grabbed it, but he can't hear anything because of the noise, and it looking for the third part. Okay, it goes off, so they fire. Okay, so interesting that you came to that conclusion. I'd like to know where you saw that. I'm guessing on a channel that was trying to defend these guys, because as far as I know, the investigation is still ongoing and they have not officially said any of that. But if they have, maybe I'm wrong because I don't watch the news all day long. All that being said, if in fact, and remember, this is coming from someone who has been through law enforcement training, okay? I'm not a novice when it comes to this case. So, sorry, I'm a street preacher, but Gorilla was talking about this. So this is not coming from a novice in this department. If you are wrestling with somebody who, by the way, is on their hands and knees in a submissive position, and you can't tell when a shot goes off that it's behind you as opposed to right in front of you, if you can't tell that difference, and when I say that, look, I know that in the heat of the moment you don't always think about stuff, but that means you're not properly trained. Because you don't, if I was sitting, even if I had my weapon, like there was one of the agents had his weapon drawn. I think it was probably the guy that took the first shot, right? He had his weapon drawn, pointed at him, right? And let's say you're right that the first shot was actually the guy accidentally discharging Preddy's weapon. And when I say that semi-sarcastically, it's like, look, just because, and you say, well, the weapon has a history of misfiring. I don't know how much you know about firearms, but if you're safely holding a weapon, it doesn't just go off. All right, you would have to at least touch, the trigger or the hammer in some way that would cause it. The gun doesn't, like if you set a weapon on the floor and just let it sit there, it's not going to just go off. That's not how they work. And this guy was a legit gun owner. He'd been, by the way, when he was kicking the tail out of the place, he had his gun on him then, and they even tackled him then, and nothing happened that time. And so chances are the gun was not in his holster, already cocked, where all he had to do was barely tap the trigger to have it go off. If that was the case, then it probably would have gone off both the first time and when he was first being tackled. However, all that being said, if I have the gun pointed at the guy and he's literally just a couple of feet in front of me, and then the officer who was walking away was clearly at least 10, 15 feet away from me, behind me, accidentally discharges the other firearm, I'm not going to sit there and shoot the guy in front of me. I'm going to whip around and with my weapon at wherever I heard the gunshot come from, because I'm going to think there's another shooter. So that just tells me that the ICE agents are even more incompetent than I already thought they were. Or the training is even worse than I thought it was. Because if you can't tell the difference between someone 2 feet in front of you and someone 10 feet behind you firing a weapon, you have no business being in law enforcement. Although it does show that he doesn't have a problem getting violently involved in a situation involving armed ICE officers. Well, probably because he didn't think he was going to actually get shot. He probably knew that there are certain rules to how law enforcement is supposed to behave. And he wasn't afraid of getting arrested. And you know what? Again, while he should have been arrested the first time for sure, I think it's debatable on the second incident whether or not you should say that he should be arrested or not. But he certainly didn't do anything warranting getting shot. The video of Preddy kicking the taillight dispels the media narrative that the poor innocent nurse was nonsense and that he was a professional agitator. Actually, no. You see, and this is the problem. You're all you're doing is taking and going in the opposite direction without evidence that the media did initially. So, on the left, you have people that are trying to say he's the poor, sweet, innocent nurse who's being roughed up by these evil Gestapo brute squad types, right? And on the right, they're trying to say this guy is a professional agitator. And of course, if you listen to what Trump and Noam were saying, that he was an assassin who wanted to eliminate as much law enforcement as possible with, his massive arsenal that he was carrying with him. Neither of those have the support of the evidence. Professional agitator would mean that he's being paid as a person whose job it is to basically go out and harass ICE agents and stuff. I would say he may not like ICE. I think that's pretty clear. He doesn't appreciate what they're doing, and he thinks that they should not be in his city. Now, that's not being a professional agitator. That's just being someone who's upset about the police presence in his city. And him being at two different protests in a span of 2 weeks doesn't mean that he's a professional agitator. It just means that he was at two different protests in the span of 2 weeks. So what? That's not a crime in and of itself. And to suggest that it is to rob people of their basic rights as citizens of this country. Now, again, I'm not defending what he did in the first incident at all. I think that kicking that taillight out was a crime and he should have been arrested. But the behavior of ICE in both incidents has been absolutely deplorable, and it doesn't excuse that because they are the professionals. They are paid to do this. But Preddy's job was being a nurse, not being an agitator. And then again, I don't know why everything you seem to be doing is posting twice. Right. Well, what was he trying to accomplish? What was he trying to accomplish by attacking the SUV? He was just basically pissed off and venting his frustration. That would be my take on it. And was that a crime? Absolutely. Should he have been arrested? Absolutely. Not defending that. And so, yeah, as far as the weapon going off so they fired, that means that they're even more incompetent than I believed. Joseph says, yep, he was trying to impede operations of the agents, a felony. Yes. And what's your point? That doesn't make him a professional agitator. That makes him a felon. Just like Trump is a felon. So what? I think that you guys are, and again, this is the problem. We get our emotions tied up into this rather than trying to analyze it logically. And so because we get so emotional about it, we think that because he disagrees with my ideology, therefore what he's doing is worse. That's not good on either side. That's a bad way to do it. I don't care if you're a liberal or you're a conservative. If you judge, and we see this, by the way, constantly on both sides of the aisle, and it's not, don't try to tell me, but their side is worse. No, both sides do this with such regularity, it's sickening, which is that every time somebody on the other side does something, it's considered terrible. But when our guy does it, there's a reason for it. Right? Or it's fake. obviously, like, like that what's her name that had the substance sprayed at her, Omar something. Because, oh well, obviously that was all a fake setup because she's just trying to distract people from the fact that she got in trouble over the shifting around of funds, blah blah blah. However, when Trump throws stuff around left and right, people don't sit there and and people on the left say obviously Trump's just trying to hide the Epstein files, and you say, oh well, that's fake news. The Epstein files is just a liberal hoax. Well, the Epstein files wasn't a liberal hoax when Trump wasn't the subject matter. It's only a liberal hoax when it's about Trump. I'm sure when they say that, because I guarantee you Clinton is in the Epstein files as well. In fact, I think they've already revealed some of that. And so I'm sure you think that's legit. But anytime it mentions, and Trump even tries to say, well, all it does is show that Epstein was conspiring against me. Whatever. And people believe it. Why? Because Trump's on their team. I'm sorry. I'm not. I think ideology, I think there's a reason that ideology sounds so close to idiot. Idiot. You know? Except at the point when he was having a tantrum, then he was just lashing out to no effect. Well, yeah, as far as the hitting the tail light, he was throwing a temper tantrum. Stupid thing to do. Bring your priest to nerd fights. I don't think the priest would be. I mean, what's he gonna? Unless he has a strong opinion about Starfleet Academy, that wouldn't be a particularly good idea. Yep, sitting on agents to. Spitting on agents too. That's another felony. He's a walking loose cannon. Okay. Well, in that case, how about all the felonies committed by the January Sixers? Or are you going to say that that was a peaceful protest? Because there were lots of felonies committed there. But of course, Trump pardoned them, and you probably think that's a great thing. Are you ready for Valentine's Day? Don't really celebrate Valentine's Day. Didn't see that till now. Not sure what time out. Let's see. I was still drunk when I went to work Tuesday. LOL. We had unlimited drinks, and those dirty chocolate banana daiquiris were going down smooth. Ooh, that sounds good. I need another vacation to recover from this one. Let's see. Oh, wow. Is the infrastructure that bad? Above ground power lines. I talked about the area that had no power. I don't know because I noticed the traffic signals were out. I don't think it was above ground power lines there, no. Is it the wires or the generators? I don't know. I just know that the power was out in that area. Is perfect vacation, left the girlfriend and the kids home. Well, in that case, it would be a terrible vacation. I mean, I look, to each their own, but I think that to me, a vacation would be to take the wife somewhere, not to leave her behind. Let's see. The food was wonderful, and cruises aren't as expensive as people think they are, but I'm only going to ever use Princess again. I've never been on a cruise. I'm not opposed to them, but, the only thing I don't like about the idea of cruises is that when those cruise ships, something goes wrong, oh man, you are screwed. Creep says amen to something I said, so thank you. You haven't watched original Star Wars, so you watch it on a 5,000-inch screen in a hot tub drinking watermelon margaritas under the stars. Well, I would say this. You haven't watched the original Star Wars unless you saw it in 1977 in a movie theater, and it was just called Star Wars. Is anyone punished during life and given a pass when they die? That's actually an interesting question. As far as there's a difference between punishment and consequence when we talk about sin. Consequence of sin can be like, let's say that you rob a bank and you're convicted of the crime and you get thrown in jail for 5 years. So the 5 years, it might be human punishment for the crime, but it's not divine punishment necessarily for the crime. That's a natural consequence of that sin. Now, let's suppose that that person was also a saved, believing Christian. Would they be punished in the afterlife for the crime of robbing that bank? It depends on what your thought is on forgiveness and grace and how all that works. And so most people would argue not if you genuinely repented of it, but the problem is, did you genuinely repent of it, or did you just feel bad because you got caught? And yes, God cares a lot about it. God cares everything about attitude. In fact, that's something that a lot of people just don't get. Is that that's why the Jews had such a tough time with Jesus? Is that Jesus was trying to explain to the Jewish leadership at the time that it's not about following the law; it's about what's in your heart. And is what's in your heart the same as what the law is trying to teach you? The law doesn't say thou shalt not kill because the actual act of killing is the problem. The problem is the hatred you have in your heart that would lead to killing, right? Or the callousness of your heart that would lead to you killing with indifference. And that's the real problem, not the actual action of killing. There was a bartender who didn't speak any English, but she understood vodka. Well, that's, I guess, an important word for them to understand. Well, Lemon could plead ignorance. I did see a video of him not being aware at the that a misdemeanor is a crime, just a less severe crime than a felony. Well, yeah, there's some people that don't understand the difference between misdemeanor and felony and all that. Honestly, the only major difference between a misdemeanor and felony is the maximum punishment for said crime. He said around in camera that he knew exactly what they were going to do, and he wasn't going to air until, and he wasn't going to air until after it was done. Okay. If what you're, and again, I don't know exactly what footage you're saying, and I don't know how much you might be embellishing it, but because all of our memories can be faulty on these kind of things. But if he did say, we are going to go in and intentionally disrupt this church service, and I know that what we're doing is illegal, and so that's why I'm not going to show it until after it's done, then yeah, sure. There's your probable cause. But if he actually said that, then the judge would have signed off on it. Do you consider candidates' faith when voting for public office candidates? Not generally, no. And I'll tell you why. I believe in faith without works is dead. And, Donald Trump says he's a Christian. His actions are anything but. And so, and politicians, particularly Republicans, will constantly talk about how they're Christian. And then they'll constantly do things that will be inherently contradictory to that. So, no, I pretty much look at what their stated policies are and how that fares compared to their track record of implementing said policies. Which is why, if I were forced to vote for one of the major parties, I probably would have voted for Trump at least the first time. I definitely would not have the second time. If you only had a choice between Democrat and Republican, I would have not voted. And I'm seriously considering later on this year for the midterms, I'm probably not going to vote. Because I categorically disagree with most of the beliefs of the Democratic Party. And the Republicans right now are supporting behavior that is absolutely vile and disgusting to me. So I can't vote for them either. And I told my both my state senators this very thing that I will not vote for them as long as they continue to endorse MAGA. Let's see. We never had a snow when we were in Fort Lauderdale, but I'm banned from the beaches. Well, then I don't know what you did, but you probably earned it. A reporter for The Blaze was handcuffed and shackled, and he was paraded around. I don't know what you're talking about and what that has to do with anything. Let's use your words, but for Lemon. If you were part of an invading force in a church and you're holding out a cell phone, that doesn't make you a reporter. Yes, but again, what I also said when I was talking about that was that if you went to court and you looked at the footage and the footage showed that you were clearly interviewing people and trying to gather information as opposed to being an active part of the protest, then you are being a reporter. Just having a cell phone doesn't make you a reporter. Now, Lemon, as far as I know, had a cameraman there. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but it looked like it, at least from the footage that I saw. Maybe he was just holding a cell phone. But he was clearly interviewing people and trying to gather information as opposed to actively protesting. Sorry, Jerry, I watched last night on Pluto TV the DS9 episode with Q. You hit me, Picard. Never hit me. I'm not Picard. No, you're much easier to provoke. I would say this. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I say Q is not omnipotent, because when Cisco hit him, it knocked him on his butt. And I know people will say, yeah, but he's part prophet and everything. Yeah, but then if that were the case, then Q would have said, wow, how did you do that? You're just a human. You know. I thought they were worried about people targeting their families. If you're talking about the ICE agents and the reason they wear masks, again, that's not an excuse for law enforcement to hide themselves. And that may also be a part of it. But again, every single person who gets involved in law enforcement or politics or whatever puts themselves and their families at risk. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene quit. To her credit, when her family started getting death threats, she was like, okay, I'm out. And, I got respect for that. So, but Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't try to hide her face from everybody so that her family would be safer. That's not how it works. Trustin's got to run. Have a good one, Trustin. Yeah, I'll be wrapping up hopefully soon. I'm trying to get through as much of the chat as I can. It's very cold in Minnesota. Remember, just a few years ago, the government wanted everyone to wear those useless masks. Of course, we and you have. Of course, we and you have this guy, that other guy, and that one woman that's over there. And you have it. The members. Of course, we and you have that guy, that other guy, and that one woman over there, and there we have it. Those are members of Homeland Security. Yeah. Joe says, "Oh my gosh, who is kidnapped?" Nobody that I just was talking about what kidnapping is. They've been doing some wet work. Not sure what you're talking about. Oh, you meant picking up illegals to deport them when you said kidnapping just to be provocative. I get it. No, it wasn't just being provocative. You see, here's the problem. Arresting someone is a person will serve an actual warrant to a person and say that you are under arrest for the crime of, and you explain them their crime, and you then give them their Miranda rights, which, yes, do apply to people who are not in this country illegally, or who are in this country illegally. And then you escort them to your police vehicle that's clearly marked, and you take them to the local jail for processing. Then they are arraigned and they are set up with a court date and provided with an attorney if they can't provide for one themselves. And then they have their day in court, in which the state has to prove that they are in fact in the country illegally. After that, then they can be sent home. And you know what? I know that people say, oh, but that doesn't work. Then tell me how it is that all these other presidents deported more people than Trump. Let's see. Yet ICE is just following the same policies that were established during the Obama administration. Same guys in charge of ICE when Obama was in office. I think Obama even put him in charge. Okay, so again, Obama did not have masked, unmarked, uncammed people rolling up and in unmarked vehicles, nabbing people and sending them out of the country without a hearing. Obama was not doing that, as far as I know. Maybe he was, and he was just better at keeping it a secret. Stan says, yeah, but due process just takes so long. It'll take forever if they have to follow due process. Well, that's a problem where if you think that the current system takes too long, then you need to look at fixing the system, not just ignoring it. And I get you're being sarcastic there, but at the same time, yeah, the fact that it takes a while to go through due process is not an excuse to skip it. Sorry, people. All the anti-Trump rhetoric from the left has to stop. Oh, okay. So then what about all the anti-Biden rhetoric from the right when he was in office? Did that need to stop? What about the Sleepy Joe stuff and all the stuff about, because I'm sorry, everything that people are saying about Trump, MAGA heads said about Biden. Well, I mean, some things were obviously a little different because of policy differences, but you know, MAGA people would call Biden a fascist. They called Biden mentally incompetent, which, I mean, I'm not saying you can't make the case that he did have some declining mental health issues towards the end of his term. But but all that being said, when people say it about Trump, oh, it's hate. It's all this, oh, it's violent rhetoric. When they said it about Biden, oh, it's just good hearted fun. Make up your mind. Because that's exactly the kind of crap I was talking about earlier when I say that everybody's being a bunch of hypocrites when it comes to these ideologues. Because they sit there and they say it's so violent and hateful for people to call Trump a fascist when they were calling Biden a fascist a year ago. But I guess we just forgot about that. So the people who bypass due process to illegally enter the country now demand due process to be tossed out. Well, first of all, you're confusing due process with with going through the proper immigration procedures. That's not due process. Due process is specifically talking about if you are accused of a crime, how you actually, you have to go through due process. You don't just get to be convicted before anything else. You are not guilty until proven innocent, even if you are not a citizen. And by the way, you have to prove in a court of law that you're not a citizen before you can even make the assumption that they're not a citizen. Because the minute you say, well, ICE wouldn't go after someone who's actually a citizen, they have detained multiple people. They've even deported multiple people who were citizens. So, yes, they can make legitimate mistakes. That's why we have due process. And so the due process is not to protect illegal aliens from being able to get out of the country. It's in order to make sure that we don't deport people who aren't illegal aliens. It's to protect the citizens of this country. So, yes, due process is important. And yes, sometimes someone may not be a citizen, but they might be here on an asylum declaration, which is a legal form of immigration. Now, people might say, yeah, but people abused that during the Biden years. So what? That doesn't mean they broke the law. Does that mean, because look, a lot of people say that the rich shouldn't be able to write off a bunch of stuff on their taxes. Okay, fair. But does that mean that you can then charge them with a crime when all they did was follow the tax code? Of course not. And by the way, one of the most brilliant things Trump ever did from a political standpoint is when Hillary Clinton tried to get him on that exact thing about how he didn't pay any taxes. And he said he was just using the system that she helped put into place, right? That was brilliant. And it's true. So don't be blaming someone for following the law if you don't like the law. So the people who bypass due process to enter the country, I don't know why it's. Oh no, you didn't post it twice. You phrased it differently this time. So the people who bypass due process to enter the country now demand due process to be sent home. Yes, and you know what? That's their right. I'm sorry you don't like it, Joseph, but that is their right. And it's to protect people from being deported who shouldn't be. Maybe you don't get that. But you see, here's the problem. If you eliminate due process for illegal immigration, right? You say, yeah, hey, illegal immigrants, they don't need due process, right? And lots of people say exactly the kind of crap that you're saying, that they don't deserve due process because they're illegal aliens, right? Okay, fine. So if ICE shows up, kidnaps you right now, says you're an illegal alien, and sends you to El Salvador to a work prison without so much as a day in court, you're okay with that. Just to be sure, you are 100% okay with that because you don't think due process applies when it comes to immigration. Because the whole point of due process is to prevent that from happening, to prevent you from getting kidnapped and taken down to a work prison instead of the people who should be sent down there. Let's see. I did think it was good. Actually, addressed a couple of the silly press rumors. I do think it was good that he actually addressed a couple of the silly press rumors. I'm not sure what you're referring to specifically there. Let's see. Oh, like the makeup on his hand, he admitted that yes, he did get a bruise, and that he gets more serious-looking ones because of the side effects from his taking aspirin every day. You know, you can believe that all you want. I'm sorry. I know people that take a daily regimen of aspirin, and doesn't mean their hand suddenly looks like it's about to rot and fall off. I mean, I do get that, but people will believe anything he says, but they will immediately reject anything anybody else says if it's coming from what they think is a liberal source, right? But whatever. It's actually very common. Dr. Drew demonstrated it because he suffers from the same thing. Older men taking daily aspirin suffer ugly bruises from minor bumps. Some do, that's true. But you know what? It's also true that Trump has shown signs of other problems. But I don't care about that. I've never attacked Trump based on his health. However, I certainly am not going to defend Trump for attacking other people based on health issues. So, and if you guys are okay with Trump making fun of Joe Biden, and by the way, not just Trump, but almost every MAGA that I've ever known making fun of Joe Biden, if you're okay with that, then stop bitching about people that complain about the aspirins making him look like a grump from Star Trek, the original series. He admitted to falling asleep in meetings, paid it off by saying the meeting was dragging on and boring. Yeah, you know what? Here's the thing. And again, I don't know how you feel about this. You're just saying what he said, but you're throwing the LOL on it like, haha, isn't that funny? It's not funny. I don't care if it's a Democrat or a Republican. This is not a partisan issue because, again, I will never vote for a Democrat as long as they stand for the policies they stand for. But I do not want a president of the United States that falls asleep during cabinet meetings. I don't want that. Maybe he's just too old to be president. If he's so old that taking aspirin makes his hand look like it's rotting and falling off, and and he's got to lie about his health when he says, "Oh yeah, I weigh, whatever he said he weighed that was ridiculously off." You know, if he has to, and he falls asleep during cabinet meetings and stuff, we need someone. I mean, J.D. Vance, please, somebody, but not him. He is incapable and incompetent to be president of the United States if he can't stay awake through a meeting. I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that meeting, I'd probably fall asleep during the meeting, but I'm not running for president either. Yes, that can happen to anyone at any age who hasn't dozed off during long church service. Again, falling asleep during a church service is not the same as being president of the United States and falling asleep during a cabinet meeting. Those are two very different things. If you can't, I don't care how, if you think it's boring, okay, if you think what goes on in the president's cabinet meetings is boring, then you should not be president of the United States. I mean, do you guys not hear what you're saying? If and I'm not saying I think it's particularly exciting, the kind of stuff they talk about, right? But you should be into that at least and able to stay awake. And if you do think it's that boring, and we're talking about Donald Trump here, right? So he should speak up and say, you know what, this is boring. Can we move on to something more interesting? Again, you're minimizing Lemming's actions. First Amendment protects info a reporter obtains to be published. It doesn't protect their actions to obtain that info. Again, I'm not minimizing what he's saying. You are maximizing what he's doing. I am simply saying that I don't think that you have probable cause that he committed a crime. I'm not saying that what he did was okay. I'm not certainly not endorsing his actions, but I also don't think that what you have constitutes a crime. I'm sorry, I just don't. And it has nothing to do with his political ideology, because I think his political ideology sucks. And then that's the problem that I have with a lot of the way this conversation is going. The only reason you think that Don Lemon should be locked up, and the only reason you think that Preddy got what he deserved, is because of their politics, not because of what they actually did. It's just like when people say, when you have the freaking director of the FBI saying you have no right to take a firearm to a protest. And, I don't hear anybody complaining, especially on the MAGA right, even though it's kind of ironic because Trump is not conservative, but that's a whole other thing. But on the MAGA right, you have all these people that think that Kyle Rittenhouse was an American hero when he was brandishing a semi-automatic rifle at a protest, or that the January 6ers that had semi-automatic weapons at a protest, that they were all just within their rights. I can't remember who it was, but I saw some comedian. I think, oh gosh, it was, what's his name? Jon Stewart, the Daily Show guy, where he was like, I can believe that the Republicans would, be willing to trample over the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. But the Second Amendment? Really? And I know he's just making a stupid joke, but I got to agree with the point there. I'm kind of surprised that all these MAGA Republicans, I mean, that will, they'll send Christmas cards of them and their family holding up AR-15s, and now they're suggesting that it was wrong for this guy to bring a gun to a protest. But whatever. Thanks, Street Preacher, for knowing is half the battle. Okay. The First Amendment protects a reporter from... Okay, again, everything you're putting is being duplicated for some reason. Abetting is encouraging. I read exactly what abetting is. It is knowingly assisting encouraging, or facilitating another person in committing a crime. And you have to, and the tricky part is, you can't just say, oh, we know he did it. You have to be able to prove it. And I think a lot of people just think that because, it's just like, for example, Hillary Clinton and her email server, right? I'm certainly not defending Hillary Clinton. I think she's slimy as all heck. But, and everybody knows that she had the illegal email server and everything. However, she was smart. She destroyed 100% of the evidence to the point where you can't prove it ever existed. And if you can't prove it ever existed, you have no crime. So just knowing that someone is a douchebag or knowing that someone may have had an attitude doesn't mean you can prove it. And in court, you have to prove it. But they can prove it, and but can they prove it? Oh, here we go. And did they know it was a crime? You can't just arrest someone because your gut feeling. No, you cannot. Knowing is half the battle came from the night. Yeah, G.I. Joe. Yes, I know. We're not sure what your point there is. And speaking of criminal charges, it seems that there you go. Omar attacker got hit with federal charges. Yeah, until he gets he'll get pardoned by Trump, right? That was a joke. But yeah, and people say that that was an obvious fake setup. I think that's stupid. Just like I think it's stupid when people say that everything that Trump does is fake. Unless you can prove it, it's conspiracy theories are just that. So everyone suggesting it was fake might get a chance to find out if the suspect gets scared by federal punishment. Look, if it was fake, he wouldn't be being brought up on charges at all. They would have found a way for him to get away conveniently or something. Those who trespass against you, I'm not sure what your point there is. Let's see. I'm not confusing trespassing. A limited space to write, so I generalize it. That's why I said it's a process. Not sure exactly what you mean there. I know I'm way behind, so I apologize for all that. I believe that any news media adds fuel to the fire. I believe when any news media adds fuel to the fire, it should be held accountable, no matter if it's liberal or conservative news media. Well, that's where you and I differ, because the First Amendment gives them the right to spout their crap. And so you may not like it, but they have the right to say it. And by the way, if you can prove that what they're and again, because this is the thing, there are already laws in place that people tend to conveniently forget about. If a news outlet, for example, said something that was actually factually untrue, and you could demonstrate that the reason they did it was to discredit someone, and they knew that it was untrue, then you can get them on defamation. So you can absolutely get them on defamation for that. Now, in fact, that's one thing that if I was the estate, and I don't know if you can sue the Department of Homeland Security specifically, but if you can, if I was the person in charge of either the estate of Mrs. Good or Mr. Oh, now I'm forgetting his name, Alex, the guy that got shot by ICE. If I was in charge of the estate of either one of them, I'd be suing the crap out of the Department of Homeland Security for defamation. I wouldn't even worry about the actual. Well, in the case of the dude, I would get him for wrongful death as well. But defamation 100%, because they were both called. Well, he was called an assassin. She was called a terrorist, and both of those are patently false. Just cleared the driveway again. It's freaking snowing again. Yep, that's the thing about snow. Stan says, sadly, the agents and the instigators are all acting completely out of line. Just not sure what the answer is. Well, You say the agents and the instigators are all acting completely out of line, but none of the agents are dead. Just like a few times Christ had to get onto Peter, or one time even had to rebuke Peter, that doesn't mean he stopped being Christ's right hand man to say. Well, the interesting thing though about Peter is Peter didn't really become Christ's right hand man until after the resurrection. And you actually see that in the morning fish fry when Christ pulls Peter aside and says, "Do you love me?" 3 times. I think that that is when Peter really became Christ's right hand. He said that he would build the church on the rock that is Peter, but that didn't happen until after the resurrection. It'd be hard to start a protest at my church because mine is off a freeway. I don't see why that would make it hard. Instead of the beating, instead of the beating isn't supposed to be instead of arresting. Violence should only occur if the attempt is to arrest them. Yes, 100%. What they did was literally rough them up like a brute squad. And everybody seems fine with that. Oh, yeah, the agents just look inexperienced. And you know what? That's the thing. Like they say, oh, well, this agent had like 6 years on the force or 8 years on the force or whatever it is. If that's true, then man, are they incompetent. I mean, my goodness, how bad do you have to be? Let's see. Yeah, I gotta hurry up, man. It's getting late. And I'm still, man, I can't believe how far behind I am. You guys have been just chatting up a lot. They are not secret police. We all know what they're doing, and law enforcement can use force in subduing someone who is committing vandalism, assault, whatever, and then decide not to arrest. You know what? Maybe the funny thing is, if we had social media in the 1940s and the 1930s, I wonder how many people in Germany would be saying exactly that kind of thing. And I'm not trying to suggest, I don't think that Trump is the same as the leader of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. I don't. However, when you have a police force that has zero accountability, they wear face masks. They, unlike everybody else, they don't wear body cams. And you'd say, but they're not secret police. Then what is secret police? You say, oh, because we know what they're doing? Do you really? Or is it just we know what they're doing when we catch them on film? Because you really think that, if Trump, imagine if during the election, Trump had said, well, here's what I want. I want to get ICE to where they're running around in plain, unmarked vans and wearing face masks and not identifying themselves as law enforcement and just grabbing people off the streets. That's how we're going to clean up America. And then, of course, people would freak out. And, of course, then all of a sudden they'd say, oh, he was only kidding about that. Right? That's what people would say. I'm, I'm sorry. It's Joseph, wake up. And again, I am not a liberal. ICE versus SS, who wins? That's silly because I'm not, you know, I'm not the person that's calling ICE the Gestapo. I will call them a secret police force because of the fact that they are unidentified, hiding, and don't wear body cams. But I won't compare them to the SS. But if a protest did start at my church, someone hit me or threw something, I'm going to be mad and do something to them. Well, then you would be guilty of assault. You got to be careful about that. Just because someone, the police can use reasonable force to detain or to arrest somebody or to maintain the peace. But you don't get to, just because someone hits you doesn't mean you get to hit them back. That's not how it works. Assuming that we only know what they're doing for now. Yeah. And Creep says sorry. Oh, don't be sorry. But yeah, I'm not going to make that comparison. Steven Crowder, Tim Pool, Glenn Beck, Angry Cop, Donut Operator, all did frame by frame. Yeah, because you know who's really unbiased is that list of people. By the way, Tim Pool, he's bought and paid for. I'm sorry. I know you love him, but anybody, and I don't know about Steven Crowder. Glenn Beck, I think, he spouts his own opinions, even if he's sometimes a little wacko. I don't know who Angry Cop and Donut Operator are. But Tim Pool, whenever people use a person who is literally a paid influencer as a source of information, that's dangerous. And the worst thing is you don't think it's dangerous and you think I'm crazy because I don't believe everything that Tim Pool says. Because Tim Pool is this refreshing conservative voice. No, he's the person who's paid to say conservative things. Just like when he was being paid by Russia. But he didn't know it was Russia that was paying him $10,000 a month. Well, then he's an idiot. Let's see. SIG P320s have been bumped and they fired. They should be recalled for some reason. SIG hasn't been forced to recall them. I don't know that particular make and model of weapon. Let's see. How prone. Let's see. Let's see, there's a couple of lawsuits for unintentional discharges, dozens of incidents reported by law enforcement and civilians. SIG Saucer maintains the pistol is safe, cannot fire without a trigger pull. Critics and lawsuits allege that it is vulnerable to discharge if dropped at specific angles or jarred. Okay, so according to the lawsuits, it's if you drop the weapon and it hits at a specific angle or is jarred. Not that if you're just holding it, it'll go off. All right. So now, yes, that could be don't get me wrong. That's a definite design flaw. If a weapon, if you drop it, it would discharge. Despite what you see in Hollywood movies, that should never happen. That being said, if you're telling me that the officer disarmed the guy and then oops, butterfingers dropped the weapon on the ground and it went off, that just adds more to the incompetence factor. And besides that, it still doesn't absolve the other officers from not being able to tell the difference between a gunshot 15 feet behind them versus 3 feet in front of them. In July, up here in Minnesota, there were ads to become an ICE agent. That was only a few months ago. I wonder if those who responded are out there now as agents. Probably. That's the sad thing. All I got to say, down with democracy and with the monarchy. I don't want Trump as a king. I don't want Trump as a king either, but I wouldn't say down with democracy necessarily. The pay is good. I thought about it. I didn't want a hassle. I'm glad I didn't. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. Not with And here's the thing: why would the ICE has been hiring these massive numbers of people, and now all of a sudden we're having these incidents. Why would somebody, considering the political climate right now, why would you sign up to be a member of ICE? Well, I can only think of two reasons. One, you're desperate for a paycheck, and two, you really got a beef with illegals. And if your reason is that you really got a beef, you should not be on the streets as law enforcement. And if your reason is that you're desperate, you should not be on the streets as law enforcement. Apparently, this gun, the SIG P320, is known for accidental discharge. Yes, I just read the thing. If it is dropped or at specific angles or jarred, and if that was the case, then the ICE officer carrying the weapon away was incompetent. And by the way, wouldn't they have said at the initial briefings that the weapon discharged. I don't know where where this guy's weapon, was discharged came from. But let me see. Uh, ex- um, let's see. Statement, President. Yeah, I don't see where you have anything official stating that Preeti's weapon was discharged. And just because Tim Pool says it was doesn't make it so. Sorry. No offense to Tim Pool or Glenn Beck or any of those guys. But if, they can say that all day long, that doesn't make it true. Now, if you have an official report that says, okay, here's what happened, and this guy's X number of times, okay, well, at least you can state it was discharged. But I'm still skeptical. And let's see. So this is a picture of a guy messing with. This is that link that Street Preacher sent. Side slap can cause unintended discharge. So what he's showing is that if you pull the trigger back from the side, it can discharge the weapon. Because notice, in order to have it happen, he has to have his thumb on the trigger, and then he squeezes the barrel and it makes it discharge. So you're telling me that a trained law enforcement officer was carrying a loaded weapon with his thumb on the trigger, and that nobody made a report of that. I mean, here we are, what, a week after the incident, and nobody's said it so far from an official channel yet because they can't figure it out. Lots of people were at different protests in 2 weeks, but 2 weeks in a row, he found himself in a scuffle with immigration agents. That certainly show his character. No, 1 week he was tackled by immigration agents after he broke their taillight. And the other week, he was helping somebody get up after she got shoved aside by the officers, and then he was tackled and then shot on the ground. So, well, I guess you could say, yeah, he found himself in a scuffle. He didn't really. I mean, yes, he should not have kicked the taillight. Don't get me wrong. I'm not defending that. But in both cases, he didn't attack the officers directly. In both cases, the officers tackled him, which tells me that they need some training. For what it's worth, I've only ever shot a 22 and I didn't like it. I've shot a few different weapons. I've never had a P320. So I don't know anything about that. I fired, as far as handguns, mostly 45s and 9 mils, but the 45 I preferred was the Colt military issue. I thought it was really nice. But, and I really like the M16. I've never fired an AR-15, but I really like the M16. If I was going to own a long rifle, I would want it to be an M16. And if the AR-15 truly is just a civilian version of the M16, I would get that. Don't those things have a safety? Well, again, we don't know, what actually happened. We have some people speculating that that's what might have triggered all this, which I think what they're looking for is an excuse for the law enforcement agents to have been able to shoot the guy on the ground with his hands and knees through the back 10 times. And if there was an accidental discharge of the when the guy carried away the weapon, then okay, then the excuse is it startled the other guys and they all started shooting him in a frenzy because they thought he was somehow shooting them while his arms and legs were in plain view on the ground. To me, every excuse you can come up with for it just makes them look more incompetent. Just like a leftist. No idea what you're talking about there. Let's see. I think the safety might have been off. Doesn't the show the trigger partially pulled and then it goes off being bumped on the slide? Yeah, that's what the video that you sent shows. Is that if you partially pull the trigger and squeeze the barrel, it can cause a discharge. But you still have to be partially pulling the trigger. And you can argue whether or not that's bad enough to say, because, when I read the initial description, it said that the makers of the weapon say that it will not discharge unless there's a trigger pull. And this guy trying to demonstrate how these things can accidentally discharge was doing a trigger pull. He was just doing it from the side to make it see like, ooh, see, like anybody carries a weapon like that. If you do, you are incredibly careless and have no business holding a firearm. If the safety was on, it's a mistake. Never walk around one in the chamber with the safety off. Well, and the thing is, as a law enforcement officer, you would always assume that it had one in the chamber. But the thing is that safety on or off, you could keep your hand away from the trigger, and that would have taken care of it. Funny seeing Epstein playing horsey with some funny seeing Epstein playing horsey with some girl. I have no idea what you're talking about there. I don't see how that would be funny. If it wasn't staged, how'd they get the syringe past security metal detectors? Easy. Let's see. Okay, so this is a syringe, medication that I have to inject. All right, so the only metal part is the needle, right? Not the syringe itself, right? And like with most, you can unscrew this needle and it is no longer there. And then you have no metal. And if you look at the actual video, he had a syringe with no needle. There's the answer to your question. So there was no metal to detect. I wouldn't want Trump on my team. Doesn't look like he had much of an arm. Ba-dum-bum. January 6th, people were all just doing it for the gram. If you're talking about recording their videos, probably. The point, if me say let's see. The point, if me say I try being an Orthodox preach on here, is to have Michael understand Orthodox Christianity. Look, again, for the most part, Orthodox Christians, while, Alex Bogey aside, I've known Orthodox Christians that I think are wonderful, God-fearing people. I've also known Orthodox Christians that are delusional jerks. And by the way, I can say the same about Protestant Christians and Catholics as well. So, the only thing I won't say that about is Mormons. Every Mormon I've ever known has been a really nice person. But, I wouldn't necessarily say God-fearing because they're kind of pagans. But at any rate, I don't have a problem with Orthodox Christians. However, the church itself, like the Catholic Church, believes that they are the direct apostolic following after the original 12, which, because they say they're the unbroken line of the church going all the way back to the original 12. And that's fine as a matter of history if you want to try to claim that, but that does not give you any kind of special authority. But they believe, as do the Catholics, that when Christ gave Peter authority over the church, that somehow that was to be passed on from generation to generation, and that the church actually has the authority to dictate what God's wants and beliefs are here on earth. And I do not believe that the church has the right to change Scripture, period. I agree with when Paul wrote in, I can't remember which book it was, but it's one of the epistles. He writes that if anyone, even an angel, comes to you and preaches a different gospel, that you are to reject it. Ever watched the Fat Albert movie? No, I've not. All I got is a truck. That's the only vehicle I own. Okay. You were talking about once saved, always saved, sinning in grace when I said amen. Oh, okay. Why don't your kids drive? Why don't my kids drive? Well, mental health more than anything else. That was like an hour ago. Yeah, I know I'm way behind in the chat. Jesus was a virgin because in the Bible, Old Testament, Jesus was a virgin because in the Bible, Old Testament, were you full of multiply? So is he a natural man, natural sex urges, or easy beyond that question? All right, if I'm Yuxty, if I'm understanding, because the way you wrote this is a little fragmented here, but first of all, Jesus was not a virgin because of anything in the Old Testament. In fact, as far as Jesus' sexuality, it's not implicitly or explicitly discussed at all. But I don't know what you mean by were you full of multiply. If you're asking if he was fruitful and multiplied as opposed to me, because the way you phrase it would be like, well, I have two kids, so, there's that. But as far as was Jesus fruitful and multiplied, there is no record of Jesus taking a wife or having children. Doesn't mean he didn't, but there's no record of it. So is he a natural man? If you mean is he human, the answer is yes. Natural sexual urges. We don't know what his sexual urges, if any, were. Everybody's sexual desires are different. That I think that, like Kinsey was right about one thing is that it's not just like everybody is either gay or straight and there's nothing else. There's some people that fall in between and there's gradations all along the scale as far as what your natural urges are. But natural urges doesn't mean, good. It just means what you would naturally, whether you like chocolate or vanilla or you like some kind of mix of chocolate and vanilla, right? But if you're asking what Jesus's sexual preference was, don't know. Doesn't say. Now, Jesus clearly preached that the God approved relationship was one man, one woman in a marriage. However, as far as what Jesus himself desired, if anything, it doesn't say. Why don't you celebrate Valentine's Day? Well, the honest reason is just because it falls during our annual 40-day fast. What's your opinion on what's happening on the Dominion during and Star Trek Starfleet account Academy? It still exists or is part of the Federation? All right, so if I understand this question correctly, because again, Yuxty, take your time when you're typing something. I know this was a while ago, but take your time when you're typing something because this sounds a lot like word salad. But I think what you're trying to get at is what happened to the Dominion by the time we get around to Starfleet Academy. Is it still out there or is it a part of the Federation now? I'm trying to remember if in Discovery in the later seasons that they mentioned the Dominion. I don't think they do, but I could be wrong. I would guess that the Dominion has either basically established their borders and staying behind it, or they are in fact, because remember, In the 32nd century, which is when Starfleet Academy was takes place, the Federation at that point was fragmented and is only a small percentage of what it was before. So remember, Betazoid was just rejoined the Federation in the second episode of Starfleet Academy. So as far as the Dominion, who knows? The only thing we know for sure is at least some Jem'Hadar have crossbred with other species. Trump's pastor is a sick person. I don't know Trump's pastor, so I wouldn't know. Donald Trump was a Democrat until he wanted to run for president. Hillary had that in the bag, so he changed parties. Well, Donald Trump changed parties in 2009. And the funny thing is that with the exception of immigration and abortion, most of his policies are still Democrat. It's just that because MAGA people are blinded by immigration and abortion, they don't realize that they're just voting for a tax and spend liberal. Whoa, what about Trump? What has Trump done that you would say he's not a Christian? Ending wars, ending trans stuff, cracking down on lawbreakers, that's all Christian stuff. Actually, it's funny. So I would say this. The only thing of any of that you could possibly attribute to being Christian stuff is ending wars. Because ending trans stuff and cracking down on lawbreakers, those are specifically political issues. Christ said, blessed are the peacemakers, and so that's the only reason I would throw ending wars in there. But even then, he's talking about personal behavior. A lot of people forget this. Christianity isn't about how to run a government. It's about how to personally behave. And when a person behaves as a Christian should, then they show what was called in common Christian vernacular the fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit includes things like a sense of peace and joy, patience, stuff like that. Does Trump exude any of these? No, he does not. But also, lovingness and kindness are included in the fruits of the Spirit, which Trump shows zero. Does Trump show love towards his enemies? Absolutely not. He mocks them, he insults them, and he attacks them at every possible turn. I'm not talking about what he did in Venezuela, whether you want to argue about whether that was a violation of international law or not. I'm talking about when he talks about a political rival that he doesn't like who happens to have a physical disability, and he walks around going like that, making fun of them. That's not Christian behavior, right? It's not Christian behavior to refer to your rival when running for president as Sleepy Joe or Crooked Hillary or any of the other slurs that he's come up with for his political opponents. It is not Christian behavior to, when asked a tough question, to then try to discredit the person asking the question rather than answer the question. So, no, he is not a Christian by any measurable standard. The system is trying to make the world dystopian. I don't think it's the system. I think it's the people in the system. It's a really bad sign when a candidate are so poor that they can't find anyone to vote for in good conscience. Yeah? Let's see. I know that things seem to have ended well in Venezuela, but Trump's motives were for the oil, not for the oppressed people. I don't know what Trump's motives were. I don't pretend to read his mind, but I think that it was an illegal action. And people try to point to the fact that we did something similar with Manuel Noriega. Well, two wrongs don't make a right. In 2008, Venezuela stole the oil assets from the U.S. companies. Trump just got it back and got rid of the tyrant, too. You see, I understand you believe in all the propaganda. But at the same time, you also have to understand that what he did was violate a sovereign state. And the only thing that international law recognizes as self-defense is if there's an imminent imminent threat of attack, which there was not. Venezuela, I remember how well it turned out when our government placed Saddam as leader of Iraq. Well, or the Shah of Iran, and so now we want to do the same thing in Venezuela. Only Spider Man is allowed to wear a mask. Well, actually, I think that it's kind of funny. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in Daredevil season 2. But I do think that one of the things that you can make a genuine point about that's a problem with superheroes is that they hide behind masks. And I think that's part of the reason that in the MCU, so very few of them actually have secret identities. Let's see. All, if not most, superheroes wear masks. Yes, but that doesn't mean that, that's also fiction. And again, that's not okay. And Joseph says, wrong. It's not how immigration hearings work. They are not held in criminal courts. They are held in civil procedures. Well, if they're civil procedures, then they're not criminals. Thank you for clarifying that. The people who didn't follow due process entering the country now demanded to go home. It's silly. You keep saying the same thing over and over like that somehow makes it true. Look, due process is to protect everybody. I understand you don't like it. You just want to get rid of the bad guys. The problem is due process is to make sure we only get rid of the bad guys. Biden really fell asleep a lot. Yes, and I'm not defending Biden. I'm just saying that if you're okay with Trump and MAGA people making fun of Biden, then you should be perfectly okay with people making fun of Trump now. Again, you're mixing up immigration hearings to determine immigration status. The hearings are their due process. So, I understand what you're trying to say. But you see, here's the problem. We have actually deported people that were under the asylum protection. We've actually deported people who are U.S. citizens. We've actually deported people who were resident aliens who were here legally. We've actually deported people incorrectly because they're not getting their hearings. And maybe you're just not getting this, but you see, what happens a lot of times, these ICE agents will grab somebody in the middle of the night, throw them on an airplane, and the next thing they know, they're in a work camp in El Salvador. There was no hearing. Or they're in the process of doing their hearings to try to do things legally, and then they arrest them at the hearing before everything can be done. So they say, see, they're not here legally yet, so we're taking them out. I'm sorry. Underhanded tactics like that, using people that are hiding behind masks with no body cams. I don't know how you can't see that these are evil practices, but whatever. I ever watched CSI in Miami? No, I never got into the CSI shows. Yeah, just like news video I saw the other day where ICE agents detained 3, I believe, homeless Native Americans, and apparently they lost track of them. Okay, that's not good. If they can't tell, the something, I believe they were Navajo. I heard something about them detaining some Native Americans, which is kind of weird because, Native Americans have sovereign status in this country. They are actually the only ones that have a true sovereign citizen status. And so, yeah. And so if ICE is actually going after Native Americans, dude, that's bad. I thought that was funny he's making excuses. Okay. Not sure what you're referring to there. And then there's some kind of Facebook thing that you're now linking to. You put these links on, like the problem is I have to go to another screen to click on a link, so then I got to find it here. All right, what's this Facebook thing you're sending me to? Oh, it's like I'm getting pissed off at how the press reports Mr. A million times. I was telling myself, yeah, I didn't realize how much COVID was that. I know what the point. There's a doctor. Oh, this is that Dr. Drew you're trying to say about this about the aspirin thing. Look, I don't care about Donald Trump's bruises. I'm just saying, if you're going to be mad about people making fun of Donald Trump's bruises, then stop making fun of other people. And stop thinking it's okay for Trump to make fun of other people. We need a healthy leader running the country. Well, we haven't had that since Obama. Honestly, Obama was healthy, Bush was healthy, Clinton was healthy, Bush Sr. was healthy. Reagan was healthy up until like the last year of his second term. Then he probably should have been removed. Carter was healthy. Nixon was healthy. Ford was healthy. But yeah, the last couple of presidents, not so much. Apparently, a combination of age, taking aspirin, and having skin that was exposed to a lot of sun. Uh, well, how could his skin be exposed to sun with all that orange paint on him? I don't know, but that's a joke. Here's the problem with American politics. Both part of leadership, both political parties, are citizens over the hill. I kind of get the idea that you're saying that both leaders are over the hill, which is true. I'm not sure what the rest of what you're trying to say is. Kyle Rittenhouse was being chased by a child molester. Oh, Lordy. Okay, yeah. Kyle Rittenhouse, an American hero for showing up at a protest with a loaded weapon with the specific intent of shooting people, and then he shot people. He's such a hero. Look, I'm not saying that Kyle Rittenhouse, you can't make the argument that it was self defense. I mean, he obviously got off on self defense. But I'm not going to call that kid a hero. He had no business being there. And as far as the people that he shot, I don't know that any of them were child molesters. I don't know where you're getting that from, because they were protesters and they were violent, and again. Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there. You want to talk about a professional agitator? You go to a protest that you disagree with, armed, with the intent of shooting people, and then you shoot people, and it's self-defense. Can't make this stuff up. But as far as the person chasing him, I have not heard that. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but Kyle shouldn't have been there anyway. Let's see. It would be funny if young Michael drove a monster. Okay, not sure what that means. Was making a point during the Reagan administration, kids' cartoons are required to have an end of episode PSA announcement, though Republicans were against the government trying to raise one's children. I was, the G.I. Joe thing and others that did that kind of thing, like the Transformers did it. A lot of them did it back then. Not all, but and it was not that it wasn't that the shows were required to do it. It's that networks were required to produce a certain percentage of educational content. So then the networks turned around to some of their more popular shows and said, okay, you got to put a piece of educational content in your show, which is where we get the G.I. Joe PSAs and stuff. I kind of preferred things like Schoolhouse Rock as a method of doing it. Schoolhouse Rock was awesome. It's funny because people of my generation understand civics better because of Schoolhouse Rock than the current generation. Because of them stupid cartoons about a bill who wants to be a law. What's the most nasty movie you've ever seen? Oh, gosh, I don't know. I probably blocked it out of my memory. I mean, depends on how you grade nasty. Help us identify the Jewish people in your neighborhood. Thank you for your attention in that matter. Yeah. Well, now it's just illegal immigrants instead of Jews. Everybody stop texting when he says he's caught up and just blast him with comments. Well, then I'll just stop anyway. Salty, you tell me to wake up, but you don't recognize your own TDS. I don't know what TDS stands for in all your responses here. When I say wake up, here's the thing. I am not trying to. You act like I'm on the political left. I'm not. Okay? I am an actual conservative. Trump is not. If you believe that Trump is a conservative, you are buying into nothing but pure propaganda. If you believe that what ICE is doing is reasonable law enforcement tactics, you are buying into propaganda. And this is coming from someone who is a genuine conservative and who worked in federal law enforcement. So I do know something about which I speak here. And so I am not defending the policies or practices of the Democrats. And in fact, I think that they're just as shady as the Republicans, generally speaking. But what Trump has been doing lately has taken it to a new level, especially with ICE. And the fact that you have these two individuals now labeled as terrorists by the United States government with no evidence to support it. And in fact, evidence to the contrary. Evidence that what they say about these people is actually false. Well, perhaps a little more, to be a little more fair, just the other day in the city, ICE raided several Asian massage parlors also. Okay, well, is that supposed to be a good thing? I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. If they go and get an actual court order to do so, and they do so in a legal way, and they do not wear masks, and they do wear body cams, then we'll talk. But until we at very least get body cams on these people and they start answering to the courts, this is some serious level BS. You know, you have no idea what kind of crap you're trying to unleash when you think that the courts should be bypassed. No idea. You think it was in Los Angeles with the massage parlors? Okay. But look, if they're doing legitimate raids, I'm fine with that. If you have a beef is better to go to a steakhouse, eat the beef out. I don't know if you're trying to make a dirty joke or you're just trying to recommend a steakhouse. Forget about Tim Pool and Steven Crowder. Oh, I would not take them as a news source for, as far as I could throw them. As much as, I know people like to think that anything that comes from a major network is fake news. But I will say this, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, while they have different political perspectives on their commentary, generally report the same facts. And there's a reason for that, because they're actual journalists for the most part. So I don't necessarily think that everything that they say, I don't think everything that's on CNN is fake just because it's on CNN. But people can't seem to separate the news reporting from the commentary. And that's where people have a problem. When the person at the anchor desk reports that there was an explosion at a refinery, you're going to hear the exact same facts on each of the channels. But then when Rachel Maddow comes on MSNBC, she'll start talking about how it was all a conspiracy from the Trump administration to kill the 3 illegal immigrants that were at the refinery. And you're going to hear on Fox News how it was a heroic air raid to take out a Venezuelan dictator or something. But the facts about the explosion will be the same. So you need to be very careful about, fact versus opinion. And people can't seem to separate the two. Now, when you watch a Tim Pool, Steven Crowder, almost anybody that's exclusively online, you're only getting opinion. And a lot of times you're getting opinion about the facts. And so you'll get this huge spin on everything done. And that's where you get these stories now that apparently we now have it ironclad that this weapon was accidentally discharged, even though there's no official statement corroborating that. Once there's an official statement, if Kristi Noem, even though I don't trust Kristi Noem particularly much, but if she actually said, okay, the investigation turned out that his weapon was accidentally discharged by one of the ICE agents, which startled the other ICE agents, which is why they fired the weapons. At least I could see that as, well, it shows incompetence, but I could believe it, you know. But, having some, talking head on a YouTube video say, they see if I freeze frame here, this is where I think this is what happened. And clearly that's what happened because I'm an expert because I say I'm an expert. Exactly. You remove the mag, clear the chamber. That's why the officer holding the gun with his finger on, Why was the officer ever holding the gun with his finger on the trigger? Yeah. So apparently the officer was holding a loaded weapon with a round in the chamber and his finger on the trigger. That's apparently what happened. And we want to excuse this behavior. It was just a liquid syringe for administration of fluids to a baby's rectum. I don't know specifically what kind of syringe it was. That's a little bit more detail. I was just saying that you could clearly see there was no needle. And any standard syringe, like this syringe, is used actually for an injectable medication that I take, and it has, at like most medical grade syringes, the blue part is actually a screw-in nozzle so that you can remove the needle and put in a different gauge needle. And that's basically because, like, for example, the medication I take is very thick. It's almost like the consistency of like honey. And so I have to draw it out of the bottle with a very thick needle. And then I take it, I remove that needle, I put on a thinner needle before I inject it into my body. Because the thick needle would be too painful. Where do you have to give yourself a shot? In my abdomen. Which, by the way, is not as bad as it sounds. It took me the first couple of times I was like wincing to try and do it. Now I can do it without even thinking about it. There's been a couple of times where I've taken the shot during a live stream and nobody even knew it. Should I change my name back to Oh, you're Yuckster. Okay, good to I see it now. Yucksty. Good to see you, Yuckster. Long time no see. I think Romans 13 talks about using the sword to restrain evil, which Trump does. Okay, so let's see. You want to talk? Let's go there because you want to say Romans 13. Romans 13, submission to governing authorities. Well, it's a very short chapter, so let's take a look here, Joseph, just for you. Because even though I don't know exactly what's in Romans 13, I'm pretty much 100% sure it's not saying what you want it to say. All right, so Romans 13, and this is the NIV. I know some people don't like the NIV, but it's just an easy translation to understand, and it's reasonably accurate. Let everyone be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except for that which God established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so bring judgment on themselves. Now, let me say something about that real quick. Does that mean that includes the Trump administration? It absolutely does. I am in no way, shape, or form am advocating for open rebellion against the United States government. And by the way, this was written by a guy who was very shortly after writing this executed by the government. But even then, he believed in submission to the government. And so that this doesn't mean that the governing authorities are good, but it means that their authority is instituted by God, and so you have no right to rebel against it. This is kind of goes back to the whole thing where it says slaves obey your masters, and people say, see, that's endorsement of slavery. No, and any more than this is endorsing a corrupt government. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do what you want to be free from fear of the one in authority. Then do what is right, and you will be commended. So again, there it's say if you, generally speaking, if you follow the laws, then you won't get in trouble. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But even when you do wrong, be afraid, for the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. This is probably where you're getting to. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. So I'm assuming that that's the passage that you want to get at, right? Is that right there? It says that the government brings God's wrath to the people, right? And there is, and by the way, this is actually an interesting thing that you could, if you want to apply this to Trump, I think you absolutely can. Is that we also see in Scripture that God will sometimes judge entire nations and cause certain things to happen as a result of that judgment. He's done that to Israel multiple times throughout the centuries, including what many people believe to be the Holocaust that happened during World War II, was a judgment on the Israeli nation because they're being punished for disobedience, right? And I genuinely believe that some of the craziness that we're seeing in the United States of America right now is, in fact, God's judgment on this country. That the reason that we have as corrupt a governmental system on both the left and the right, this is not just a slight on Trump, but I think the reason we have such a corrupt government is that the United States is being judged because we as a nation have pissed all over God's word. That's my honest opinion on that. This is also why you pay taxes. This is one for the people that think, yeah, Robert, I think you're one of these thinks that taxes is theft. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. And then it just goes on to talk about how you should love everybody and that the end times are near. So there you go. So it doesn't say that the sword is necessarily used to restrain evil as much as that the sword is an agent of God's wrath, which I think actually is two different things. And I do think that the United States is being judged, and we ought to be, because we have truly crapped all over the Word of God. So you're taking personal stuff about Trump demonstrating Christianity then. I thought you said he isn't presidential as the office of... Well, he's not presidential either. There's a difference between whether or not I think someone is a Christian or not. Look, I don't think it's a slight to say someone is not a Christian. I think it's a matter of fact. Trump's behavior is not the behavior of a Christian. And that's just a matter of fact. As far as being presidential, I think that unfortunately, the reason we call, one of the reasons we refer to the apparatus of government as civics, and civics is by definition supposed to be civil, and yet we're not. We haven't been for some time. Our country used to be much more, as far as our politics, was much more respectable than you would see in some places around the world, where people would always be polite to each other and all that. Now you have the president dropping F-bombs. You've got senators and Congress people calling each other S-heads and stuff like that. It's just remarkable, the loss of decorum on both sides of the political aisle. And it's disgusting to me. We need to bring civics back to civics. Low energy Jeb. Not sure what you mean there. Robert says, yes, I tried just like several days ago, and someone said something Trump didn't like. He was caught on camera giving said person the bird. Not very Christian or presidential even. Yeah, that's neither Christian nor presidential behavior. And then Stan says, two Juans. I'm not sure why. Someone said fish fry earlier. That's what I'm doing right now. Yes, I said fish fry because I was talking about when Jesus cooked breakfast for everybody on the shore, and then he pulled Peter aside and asked if he loved him 3 times. Which unfortunately in the English doesn't quite get the deep impact of that, because when he says love each time, he's actually using a different word in the Greek with very different meanings, but it just doesn't come across very well. He just says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? So, oh, come on now, who's listening to the propaganda? If there are mistakes made with hundreds of thousands of deportations, they'll be resolved. Just like cop arrests the wrong person, it's resolved. Here's where you and I disagree, okay? Because here's what actually happened. Like in the case of, I can't remember the guy's name. Remember the one that Trump kept saying was part of MS-13. He was under an order of protection. He was put on a plane bound for El Salvador, sent to a work camp, and the judge specifically ordered that they turn the plane around. They said, nope, nope, can't do it. They blatantly defied the court order. And then when he got to El Salvador, they said, "Well, sorry, we can't get him. He's in El Salvador." When they asked the El Salvadorian president, he said, "Well, I can't send him back to the United States. That'd be an illegal border crossing." And everybody's just kind of saying, "Yeah, wow, gee, sucks really bad to be him." Then somehow, lo and behold, after a U.S. senator went down and visited the guy, they managed to get him back. But I'm sorry, that is a lack of due process that is vulgar and sick. Because you want to say, oh, well, he's guilty until proven innocent, and so we're just going to let him rot in El Salvador rather than actually give him his day in court. And I understand you may think that he's the worst thug on the face of the planet, and he may well be, but he has the right to defend himself like any other person. Michael's Little Red Riding Hood because of the jacket. Okay. Let's see. Right, we're just giving an example. Was just giving an example of anti-Trump rhetoric. I'm not sure exactly what that was referring to because it was a while ago. But if you thought I was attacking you personally, I apologize. Let's see. We or you need to tune out all the rhetoric. Well, I actually this is something that I do believe that anytime, and one of the things that I do find annoying is right now it's a very popular narrative on the political right. Well, I keep saying the political right, but it's really the MAGA, because MAGA is not political right. It's a it's a subverted leftist philosophy. But the MAGA on the MAGA party, if you will, the narrative has been that we need to tone down the violent rhetoric from the left, which is again kind of funny because they are the left. But the problem there is that the rhetoric they're specifically talking about is generally things that have been said about the political left by MAGA, right? So referring to Joe Biden as a fascist, for example. And the funny thing is, I saw it was one of those Jubilee debates. It was kind of funny, and I looked it up to verify it. There's only one politician that ever actually called Donald Trump the name of the dictator from Germany in the 1940s, and that person was J.D. Vance. Was it Jared from Subway chasing Kyle? Yeah, I don't think so. Lest use your words and substitute Preddy. Alex Preddy shouldn't have been there. Look, Alex Preddy, as far as the second incident, he was recording what he thought was atrocities by ICE, and he was not, to the best I could tell, doing anything to directly obstruct. And the only thing, his only crime, and you could argue that this was a crime, was that he tried to help the one woman get up after she was shoved down by the ICE agent. But he never attacked an ICE agent. And the only thing, but you could argue that when he reached down to help the woman get up, now his back was to the ICE agent, but he did kind of get in between her and the ICE agent, so you could argue that he obstructed at that point. But I think you could also make the argument that it was inadvertent at best. But for that, he was apparently murdered. Yeah, and almost all the arcade games had just say no. No, yeah, just say now would be kind of weird. I meant it would be funny if young Michael drove a monster truck. Well, I don't know that that would be funny, but hey, give me a monster truck and I'll drive it tomorrow. After 10 years of Trump in our politics, you're going to say that you don't know what TDS means? Oh, that. Oh, you mean like how Trump tried to say that the reason that Rob Reiner was murdered was TDS. Gotcha. Sorry. No, you know what? Here, Joseph, I've said this before. I will say it again for your benefit. I don't do well with acronyms. I'm dyslexic. And so I don't, when I see three letters, I just see those three letters. I don't process what those letters represent as far as words. So if you don't put Trump derangement syndrome, I don't know that that's what you're talking about. I'm trying to think TDS. Did he did he mean to put Latter Day Saints, but he put a T instead of an L? I don't know. So anyway, and unfortunately now I don't remember what we were talking about when you put that. Yeah, it's one of the big ones. An oral syringe. Oh, there's I assume midwife supplies. Yeah, so bring back Yuckster. Let's see. Just like Erica Kirk and TPU, again, don't know what TPU is, really disgust me now. Oh wait, is that Turning Point? Is that what that is? Turning? I thought it was Turning. I don't know. Really disgusting now. The other day, unfortunately, TPU ran a TPU fundraising commercial. I just thought it was the Democrats that believe not letting tragedy go to waste. Look, I'm not going to even comment on Erica Kirk. I have my personal opinions about her, and they're not pleasant. But, yeah. Never endorse a holy war under false pretense. Well, that would be wise advice. I might agree with you on that. The country is a mess because it's less religious. Absolutely. It's not that it's less religious, it's that we've abandoned God. And I think that's something that we have to be careful of. It's not about being religious, it's about having your faith in God. And those are two different things. You don't necessarily have to be a Methodist or a Catholic or an Orthodox or whatever, but you have to put your faith in Christ. And those are, again, we get really confused on that. And that's why, unfortunately, what we have today is the most abominable thing, which is Christian nationalism. That's absolutely disgusting. Because to be Christian is not to be a nationalist. I miss the old days, says Josiah. Hey, I'm almost caught up. Do you know about the bad things Pee Wee Herman actor did? Yes. So MAGA isn't political, right? And woke isn't political left. I didn't say anything about woke, but MAGA isn't politically right. It is not, as far as right of political center. It is a left wing ideology disguised as they are sheep in wolves' clothing. Because here's what they do, and it's clever. I give Trump credit for being clever, at least. Is that, remember, Trump is an old school New York Democrat. That's what he is. And by the way, I certainly not trying to crap on the dead because I love the guy to death, and I hope you guys know that I did. But the late Berto Prey 5, he was actually, and in private conversation, he would even admit it. He was a big supporter of the Clintons, right? Bird was. And he got Trump. He really did. And so, because Bird was a New York Democrat, but he, loved Trump because Trump is a New York Democrat. What Trump did was, in order to convince the Republicans, particularly the for lack of a better term, lesser educated Republicans out there, in order to convince them that he was in fact a right winger, was he went full bore, hardcore on two issues: immigration and abortion. And as long as you have those two issues, you'll get the emotional right on your side. because that's what, when you talk to most people about what they hate about the Democrats, it's abortion and immigration more than anything else. Now, they'll say, oh, their economic policies are bad, but they don't really understand those economic policies. And so they just say they're bad. And while they say, oh, the Republicans are good, but they don't know their policies either. So then what you have is what you usually hear from the Republicans, from the conservative Republicans out there, was always that the liberal left always want to tax and spend, tax and spend. They wanted to increase taxes and increase spending, and that's how they saw an economically prosperous future for this country. Whereas conservatives believed in minimal tax and minimal expenditures to try and get government out of people's lives as much as possible. So, what's Trump's antidote to this? Well, tax and spend. But what he does is he convinces you, and many people genuinely believe that taxes aren't taxes anymore. So they think that if all these tariffs, oh, that's going to be paid by the Chinese. That's going to be paid by the Japanese. That's going to be paid by everybody but us. Because he's counting on the fact that you don't understand how tariffs work. He's betting on that. And he's 100% right so far as with the MAGA crowd. The fact that that tariffs are a straight up regressive tax on the American people puts it right into the Democrats' playbook, but people don't see it. And then the big, bold, beautiful bill is one of the biggest expenditures in fact, I think it is the biggest expenditure in the history of the government. He is a tax and spend liberal. But no, he's politically right because immigration and abortion. Whenever I see goofy MAGA people on TV, my only thought is it usually get off my side. Yeah. Bert enjoyed a nice cigar. He absolutely did. Left and right in politics have shifted. MAGA is right, conservative, but what they want to conserve has been revised. No, they are not conservative. They've just tricked you into thinking they are. That's the beauty of it. Tell me what they're genuinely conservative about. Tell me anything. And don't just say, make America great again. What are they actually conservative about? What will we if you died? What will you if I died? You will whatever you are, I guess. A 1990s Clinton's Democrat would be on the right today. Okay, so you're a Clinton Democrat. Okay, good to know. Well, I guess a 1990s Republican is what today? Because that would be what, alt-right or something? I don't think that, because that's the problem is the alt-right, again, it's all just emotionalism. It's like, and the ironic, here's the funny thing, right? Here's one thing that's always been a right wing thing is the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and rule of law. And what are we pissing all over right now? The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and the rule of law. When you say conservative, what do you want to conserve in America? Our job base, our culture? Those are what MAGA wants to conserve. See, those aren't things. To say, oh, he wants to conserve our job base. That's, you see, what conservative actually means is to preserve the institution of the Constitution of the United States of America. That's what conservative actually means. In fact, it used to all be about constitutionalism. To be a conservative meant that you want to preserve the Constitution as it stands, as it was originally intended by the Founding Fathers. To be liberal is to say that the Constitution is a living, growing, flowing document that can mean one thing to one person and something else to someone else. And that way we can reinterpret it to be our wonderful utopia today, right? And guess what Trump is doing? He's trying to change the meaning of every line, every jot, every tittle of the Constitution. I mean, he's tried to do it through executive order to try and say the birthright citizenship doesn't really mean what it says it means anymore. He's literally trying to change the Constitution through executive order. And no, he's a conservative. I meant, what will we do if you died? Well, I will eventually, so you'll move on. But hopefully, I've still got a good, couple of decades left in me. All right, guys. So now that I am caught up, I am going to wrap it up because I've been going way too long and I got a lot of driving to do. So, thank you for hanging out with me. I do really appreciate it. Joseph, uh, Josiah, Robert, anybody that I disagreed with, please don't take any of it personal because I love talking to you guys and I love having spirited conversations. And I hope we can continue to do so. And so you guys take care. God bless. And hopefully I'll see you